For more than 600 years, a carved figure has lain hidden in the bedrock of Massachusetts. To some, it is nothing but erosion. To others, it is the memorial of a fallen knight, a clue that the Knights Templar reached America long before Columbus. Is it the grave of Sir James Gunn, a forgotten voyager from Scotland? Or is it just a trick of nature, a legend born from stone? Tonight, we follow the story of the Westford Knight, a mystery that could rewrite history. For more than 600 years, a mystery has rested in silence beneath the New England sky. On a quiet slope in Westford, Massachusetts, lies a piece of bedrock, ordinary at first glance, unremarkable to most passers-by. Yet carved into its weathered surface is a faint figure, half erased by centuries of rain, snow, and time itself. Some say it is nothing, an accident of erosion, a trick of shadow and stone. But others believe it is a memorial, a knight in armor, sword by his side, etched deliberately into the rock as a marker of death, a grave, a legacy, perhaps even proof of something astonishing that men from across the Atlantic, possibly the Knights Templar themselves, walked this land long before Columbus ever set sail. This is the enigma of the Westford Knight, when the carving first began to draw attention. In the late 19th century, scholars and locals alike debated its meaning. The faint outlines suggest a sword, a shield, the shape of a man, yet the stone itself resists certainty. Was this truly carved by human hands, or are we only seeing patterns where none exist? Here's where legend steps in. Some stories claim the figure marks the grave of Sir James Gunn, a Scottish knight who died during a secret voyage to the New World in the 14th century. If true, the implications are staggering. It would mean that nearly 150 years before Columbus, explorers tied to the Templars and to the Sinclair family of Scotland had already crossed the Atlantic and left their mark on American soil. But that is only one side of the tale. Others argue the carving is nothing but wishful thinking, a natural fracture in the stone given meaning by human imagination. If the Westford Knight is a hoax or simply erosion, then it becomes a story about how legends are born and how badly we sometimes want to believe them. Yet there is something undeniably haunting about the figure. Stand by it at dusk, when the sun dips low and the shadows stretch across the stone, and the carving seems to come alive. The line of the sword becomes sharper, the outline of the knight's armor more distinct. It is as if the stone whispers its truth, only to those willing to listen. And that whisper asks a question. What if it's real? If the Westford Knight truly is a memorial to a fallen knight, then what happened on that voyage? Who else was with him? Why did they come? And what secrets did they carry with them across the sea? These questions tie the Westford Knight to a wider web of mysteries. The strange Newport Tower in Rhode Island, the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, the enigmatic Zeno map of the North Atlantic. Together, they form a breadcrumb trail scattered across continents, hints that history may not be what we think it is. In this video, we're going to follow that trail. We'll look at the stone itself, the stories that surround it, the arguments for and against its authenticity. We'll trace the legends of Sir James Gunn and the Sinclair voyage. We'll explore why so many believe the Knights Templar, or those connected to them, had reason to seek refuge and perhaps a new home across the Atlantic. The Westford Knight is more than just a carving in stone. It is a doorway into a mystery that stretches across oceans, centuries, and cultures. And whether it proves to be true history or enduring legend, the story it tells is one that demands to be heard. So tonight, settle in, listen closely, and let's walk together into the shadow of a stone knight who may hold the power to rewrite the past. For more than 600 years, a strange carving has rested quietly in the bedrock of Massachusetts. At first glance, It is little more than an uneven patch of weathered stone, the kind of pattern that countless travelers would walk past without a second thought. Yet for those who stop, for those who trace the shallow grooves and faint outlines worn into its surface, the story changes. Some see in those lines a deliberate figure, a human shape etched into the earth with purpose, a knight, sword laid across his body, armor faintly outlined, perhaps even a shield. To skeptics, it is nothing but erosion, a natural trick played by wind, water, and centuries of time. But to others, it is a silent memorial to a man who fell on foreign soil, a man whose death marked one of the most astonishing and controversial journeys in history. To stand before the Westford Knight is to stand before a mystery that refuses to fade, a puzzle that lingers like a shadow over the accepted story of the Americas. The tale begins not with the stone itself, but with the legends that gathered around it like mist. Local accounts, first whispered in the 17th and 18th centuries, told of a carved effigy in the rock, a knight in repose. Generations of townspeople passed down the story, uncertain of its meaning, yet unwilling to let it go. Then, in the 19th century, antiquarians and historians began to take notice, sketching what they believed to be there: a man clad in medieval armor, a broadsword stretching beside him, his proportions faint but undeniable. From that moment forward, the Westford Knight became a lightning rod of debate. Was this truly a medieval carving? And if so, who carved it and why? These questions became even more tantalizing when some researchers connected the carving to the Knights Templar, the enigmatic order of warrior monks who had been disbanded in Europe in the early 14th century. Could it be that survivors of the Templar order had sailed across the Atlantic and left behind this mark of their presence? One name inevitably enters the story: Sir James Gunn. According to certain accounts, Gunn was a Scottish nobleman and companion of Prince Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney. Sinclair, if the legends are to be believed, commanded an expedition across the Atlantic around the year 1398, nearly a century before Columbus. The journey, shrouded in secrecy and speculation, was said to have carried knights, seamen, and adventurers into the uncharted western seas. In the forests and shores of what is now North America, some claim that Sinclair and his men left behind clues to their voyage, one of which may be the Westford Knight. The figure carved in stone, they argue, is none other than the resting place of Sir James Gunn, who died during the expedition. The effigy was not merely a piece of art. It was a memorial to a fallen comrade, etched in permanence by men who believed their mission carried divine purpose. But the story has never been simple. The stone itself is faint, the carving eroded and incomplete. Some who visit see nothing at all, just random scratches, lichen, and fractures in granite. Others insist the details are clear: the curve of a sword, the hilt distinct, the outline of a man unmistakable. Over time, drawings, rubbings, and photographs have attempted to preserve what the eye perceives. Those skeptics argue that imagination fills in what erosion has taken away. In this sense, the Westford Knight becomes not just a carving, but a mirror reflecting back to each observer their own willingness to believe in mysteries, or their insistence on explanations grounded only in what can be proven. As the 19th and 20th centuries progressed, the story gained momentum. Writers linked the carving not only to Prince Henry Sinclair, but also to the larger mysteries of the Templars. The order, once powerful and wealthy, had been suppressed by the King of France and the Pope in 1307. Many knights were arrested, executed, or forced into hiding. Yet rumors persisted that a number of Templars escaped, carrying with them secret knowledge, relics, and treasures. Some whispered that they fled to Scotland, where they found refuge under the protection of the Sinclair family. From there, the legends say, voyages were launched across the sea, seeking new lands where the Templar vision could endure. If true, the Westford Knight might stand as the single most enduring trace of that forgotten journey, a Templar knight's grave hidden in the American wilderness long before it was called America. Yet academic resistance has been fierce. Archaeologists, geologists, and historians often dismiss the carving as a case of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive shapes and patterns where none exist. According to this view, the lines in the stone are the product of natural weathering, cracks, and human imagination layering meaning onto randomness to them. The Westford Knight is not evidence of transatlantic voyages or medieval explorers, but a story born from wishful thinking and local legend. This tension between the believers who see a knight and the skeptics who see only erosion has defined the debate for more than a century. Still, the story refuses to die. Perhaps it is because the carving lies not in isolation, but within a wider web of mysteries. From the Newport Tower in Rhode Island to the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, from carved maps to cryptic symbols, the theory of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact brims with tantalizing clues. Each artifact may stand alone as ambiguous, but together they form a mosaic that is difficult to ignore. The Westford Knight, in this sense, is more than just stone. It is a node in a network of enigmas, a piece of a puzzle that stretches across oceans and centuries. Imagine standing there in Westford, Massachusetts. As dusk falls, the stone lies partially hidden, its outlines only visible when the light catches at the right angle. You crouch low, tracing with your eyes the faint grooves that countless visitors have debated. You sense the passage of centuries, the generations who have looked upon this same patch of rock, wondering the same questions you now hold. If this is truly a knight, then he has lain here longer than the nation itself, longer than the arrival of pilgrims, longer even than Columbus's first voyage. He would represent not only a personal story of life and death, but a rewriting of history as we know it. What if the Americas were not an untouched world waiting for European discovery, but a land already crossed, mapped, and remembered by secretive voyagers? What if this stone is the single voice left behind, a knight whispering across time, saying, "I was here." Legends say that Sir James Gunn's effigy was meant to be a tombstone, a final resting place carved with care by his companions. The sword at his side symbolized his role as a knight, the length of his form etched to honor his sacrifice. If that is true, then the Westford Knight is not merely an artifact, it is an act of mourning, an act of remembrance. Left in a land far from home, his companions may have returned to Scotland, but his memory was anchored forever in the granite of a distant shore. For those who believe, standing at the Westford Knight is standing at the edge of two worlds, where myth and history blur, where stone becomes story. And perhaps that is why the mystery endures. For whether one believes in the carving's authenticity or not, the questions it raises strike deep at the foundations of our understanding. Who truly crossed the oceans before Columbus? How many stories lie buried in the landscapes we walk upon daily, unnoticed, dismissed, or forgotten? And why do we, as humans, yearn so deeply to find traces of those who came before us, to connect ourselves to a lineage of explorers, dreamers, and seekers? The Westford Knight may or may not be a knight in stone, but it is undeniably a vessel for these questions. It holds our curiosity captive, it stirs our imagination, and it reminds us that history is not fixed, but alive, shifting with each new discovery and each new interpretation. As the night deepens in Massachusetts, the stone lies silent. Wind moves through the trees, shadows stretch across the ground, and the faint grooves in granite are swallowed by darkness. Yet even in that silence, the carving speaks. It speaks not in certainty, but in possibility. It speaks in the tension between erosion and intention, between skepticism and belief. between the world we accept and the world we dare to imagine. And in that space, in that fragile, uncertain space, the Westford Knight continues to live, not as a relic of stone, but as a story, a mystery, and perhaps even a monument to a forgotten knight whose journey carried him farther than history dares to admit. The story of the Westford Knight begins not with clarity, but with whispers. In the quiet town of Westford, Massachusetts, there lies a patch of ledge that has sparked centuries of debate. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than weathered stone marked by the natural scars of time and erosion. But if you linger, if you allow your eyes to adjust, something else begins to emerge. Carved lines take shape, an outline of a sword, the faint suggestion of a shield, and most haunting of all, the impression of a figure, a knight, etched into the bedrock of New England. For those who believe, this is not merely an accidental pattern in the rock. They see a deliberate carving, the memorial of a fallen warrior who died far from home. They call him the Westford Knight, and to them, he is proof that Europeans, perhaps even the Knights Templar themselves, crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus. For skeptics, it is little more than a fanciful illusion, a trick of the human mind, desperate to find meaning in random marks. But for over 600 years, this stone has kept its secrets, refusing to yield a final answer. The first documented whispers of the carving go back to the late 19th century. In 1873, a man named Reverend Frank Woodworth wrote about curious markings on a ledge in Westford, noting that locals had long spoken of a strange figure carved there. To some, it looked like a man with a sword. To others, just scratches. But in time, antiquarians, historians, and treasure hunters alike came to see it as more than that. They began to believe they had found evidence of a knight's grave, a memorial carved by grieving companions, and soon, a name was attached to the mystery: Sir James Gunn. The story of Gunn is one that blurs the lines between history and legend. According to the tale, he was a Scottish knight who sailed to the New World in the 14th century, alongside Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney. Sinclair, some claim, led an expedition across the Atlantic around the year 1398, nearly 100 years before Columbus, and Gunn, loyal to the last, was one of his companions. But the voyage was perilous, and somewhere in Massachusetts, Gunn is said to have died. His fellow knights, unwilling to leave him forgotten, carved his effigy into the stone, a lasting memorial to a fallen brother in arms. Thus the story of the Westford Knight was born. But what evidence do we truly have? The carving itself is faint, eroded, barely visible in places. Over the years, attempts have been made to outline the figure with chalk, to enhance the features with photographs, to trace the supposed sword and shield. Some see the hilt of a medieval broadsword, others the contours of chainmail or armor. But critics argue that much of this is imagination, wishful thinking imposed on random grooves created by ice, water, and the passage of centuries. To them, the Westford Knight is not a memorial, it is a Rorschach test in stone. Still, the legend persists, and like all enduring legends, it has a way of attracting new layers, new connections. The link to the Knights Templar was not originally part of the story. That came later, as researchers began to connect the figure in Westford to the broader tapestry of Templar mysteries. By the 20th century, theorists were pointing to the similarity between the sword in the carving and those used by Templar knights. They noted that the Sinclair family of Scotland, who were said to have sponsored transatlantic voyages, had long ties to the Templars, and suddenly, what had once been a faint curiosity in Massachusetts became part of a sweeping narrative of hidden history. The idea of Henry Sinclair's voyage rests largely on the so-called Zeno narrative, a controversial collection of maps and accounts from the 16th century that described journeys across the Atlantic. If the account is to be believed, Sinclair, reached the coast of North America nearly a century before Columbus. The Westford Knight, then, became physical evidence to support this story, a grave marker left behind by those early explorers. And in this interpretation, the fallen knight is none other than Sir James Gunn, Sinclair's trusted companion. For believers, this is thrilling. The image of a knight's effigy lying in the bedrock of Massachusetts conjures a vision of a forgotten past, ships crossing stormy seas, Templar survivors carrying their traditions to a new world, leaving behind cryptic memorials. It speaks to the possibility that the official story of discovery, so neatly centered on Columbus, is incomplete, that the threads of history stretch further back in ways we can barely grasp. To stand before the stone in Westford, they say, is to stand at the threshold of an alternate history, one where the Middle Ages touch the shores of America. And yet, skepticism remains powerful. Archaeologists caution that the carving is ambiguous, that it lacks the clear precision one would expect of a medieval effigy. They note that natural processes, glacial striations, weathering, cracks in the rock can easily mimic human-made shapes. Some suggest that the story of the knight only gained traction because people wanted it to be true, because they longed for a sense of mystery in an otherwise ordinary patch of New England. And so the debate continues: is it art or accident, history or imagination? The carving itself is now protected, covered to shield it from further damage. Visitors to Westford often find themselves disappointed, expecting a dramatic figure, only to be met with faint lines that require guidance to interpret. But in a way, this is part of its power. The knight reveals himself only to those who wish to see him. He is both there and not there, both legend and stone. And in that duality lies the heart of the mystery. Over the years, writers and researchers have visited the site, each layering their own interpretations onto the stone. Some argue the carving shows not just a knight, but heraldic details, perhaps even a coat of arms. Others insist the sword's proportions match weapons of the late 14th century. On the other hand, geologists point out that glacial movement left countless scratches across the region's bedrock. The mind, ever eager for patterns, does the rest. The Westford Knight is a mirror, reflecting not only the possibility of a medieval voyage, but also the desires and biases of those who study it. But what if we suspend disbelief, even for a moment? What if the carving truly is the memorial of a fallen knight? Imagine the scene: a band of weary travelers, far from their homeland, burying their companion in an alien wilderness. They carve his likeness into the stone, hoping that someone, someday, will remember him. They know they may never return to Scotland. They know that their story may never be told. But in the act of carving, they preserve something: a name, a brotherhood, a legacy. And though centuries pass, though the world forgets, the stone endures. Could this be what lies hidden in Westford? For those who embrace the Templar connection, the implications are staggering. If Templars or their allies reached Massachusetts in the 14th century, it suggests a hidden current of exploration, a secret chapter in the history of the New World. It would mean that the Americas were not an untouched frontier waiting for Columbus, but a land already known to a select few explorers, mystics, perhaps even fugitives of history. The Westford Knight, then, would not just be a carving. It would be a key unlocking a story of voyages, exiles, and secret knowledge carried across the seas. And yet, the stone resists certainty. It does not tell us whether Gunn ever lived, whether Sinclair's voyage ever happened, whether the Templars found their way to America. It offers only suggestion, ambiguity, a tantalizing outline that slips away the closer you examine it. In this sense, the Westford Knight is not only a mystery of history, but also a mystery of the human imagination. It forces us to confront How much we want to believe, how easily we weave stories from shadows. The people of Westford, for their part, have embraced the legend. The knight has become a part of local identity, a symbol of the town's connection to something larger, older, more mysterious. Plaques have been erected, books written, pilgrims still come, standing quietly before the stone, hoping to glimpse the knight within the rock. For some, it is an act of faith. For others, an adventure. For all, it is a reminder that history is not always as settled as we think. The debate over the Westford Knight may never be resolved. Perhaps it truly is nothing more than scratches on stone, magnified into myth by centuries of wishful thinking. Or perhaps it is exactly what believers say it is, the last trace of a knight who died on foreign soil, remembered in the most enduring way possible. Either way, it continues to stir curiosity, to spark imagination, to invite us into a world where the past is not fixed, but alive with possibilities. And whether you see a knight or only stone, you cannot help but feel the weight of mystery, pressing in, whispering that history is never finished, and that sometimes the truth lies hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be seen. The stone lies silent in the Massachusetts earth, its surface weathered and scarred by centuries of rain, frost, and sun. From a distance, it is unremarkable, just another patch of granite in a region filled with rock. But for those who pause, for those who kneel close and let the light angle across its face, something else begins to emerge. The human eye lingers, tracing grooves and shadows, following lines that suggest a form half buried in time. A figure seems to take shape faint, incomplete, eroded nearly to oblivion, yet still persistent. It is the outline of what some claim to be a knight, sword in hand, carved into the very bedrock of New England's centuries, before such a figure should ever have been there. This is the mystery of the Westford Knight. At first glance, the carving is almost invisible, as if the land itself is reluctant to give up its secret. The figure must be coaxed into view, a faint outline of a head, a torso, and most striking of all, the impression of a long sword running down the length of the stone. Those who have studied it most closely describe a knightly figure in repose, lying flat as if carved into a tomb. The weapon, straight and deliberate, seems to anchor the figure, its shape reminiscent of the great swords of medieval Europe. The hilt, though worn, has been said to show the hint of a cross guard, a symbol heavy with meaning, a blade not only of war, but also of faith. To skeptics, these lines are merely the result of glacial striations, random cracks in the rock smoothed by centuries of weather. But to believers, the sword is the key. Nature may crack and erode, but it rarely carves such symmetry. For those willing to see it, the stone bears the unmistakable marks of human intention. And if human hands did carve this figure, then the questions it raises are staggering. Who carved it? When? And why? One answer comes in the form of a name: Sir James Gunn. According to legend, Gunn was a Scottish knight, perhaps even a Templar or Templar affiliated, who sailed across the Atlantic in the late 14th century. He was said to be part of an expedition led by Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, a man whispered about in both Scottish and Templar lore as one who sought lands beyond the Western Ocean. The story holds that somewhere in the New World, Sir James Gunn died, far from home. His companions, in grief and honor, carved his effigy into the stone, leaving behind a memorial to their fallen brother in arms. The Westford Knight, in this telling, is not merely a curiosity of geology, but the gravestone of the first European knight, buried on American soil. It is a powerful story, one that carries with it the romance of secret voyages, the tragedy of loss, and the intrigue of the Templars. To stand before the stone with this tale in mind is to feel the weight of history pressing close, as though the faint lines carved into the granite are not just marks, but whispers from another age. And yet, the Westford Knight refuses to be simple. Its faintness is both its power and its curse, because the carving is so eroded. Interpretation becomes subjective. One person sees a knightly effigy, another sees only randomness. A line that looks like a sword to one set of eyes is merely a fissure to another. This ambiguity has fueled centuries of debate. In the 19th century, when antiquarians first began to examine the stone in earnest, they argued fiercely over its authenticity. Some produced sketches and rubbings, highlighting the supposed knightly form. Others dismissed these drawings as fanciful, saying that chalk lines and imagination had filled in what nature had never intended. By the early 20th century, photographs were taken of the stone with chalk marking the grooves, and these images spread, fueling the legend. The knight became more defined in the public imagination than he was on the stone itself. But the story did not stay confined to Westford. The carving became a link in a larger chain of mysteries, stretching across the Atlantic. Proponents of the Templar theory pointed to the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, the carvings in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and the map of the Zeno brothers, each a puzzle piece suggesting that medieval Europeans, perhaps even the Knights Templar, crossed the ocean long before Columbus. The Westford Knight, with its suggestion of a medieval broadsword carved into Massachusetts granite, fit neatly into this pattern. And yet, skeptics remained firm. They argued that the carving was never recorded in colonial times, despite the colonists' habit of documenting oddities and curiosities in their new land. If the stone had truly been an obvious effigy, they reasoned, surely someone in the 1600s or 1700s would have noted it. Instead, the first mentions come much later, after centuries of erosion had already blurred its surface. The absence of early records, they say, speaks loudly, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Those who believe in the Knights' authenticity point out that early colonists often ignored native monuments, carvings, and sacred places, sometimes deliberately erasing or repurposing them. A faint carving in stone may simply not have seemed significant to settlers intent on survival. Moreover, the figure may have been more distinct in the 14th century, only fading as time, weather, and lichen took their toll. What may have once been a clear effigy is now but a ghost, visible only in part. The debate reveals something deeper than the stone itself, our human need to interpret, to assign meaning, to connect. When we look at the Westford Knight, we are not just studying lines in granite. We are wrestling with the very nature of history. Do we trust only what is documented, written, and verified, or do we allow for the possibility of hidden chapters, for evidence that lies outside the accepted narrative? Psychologists call this tendency to see shapes and patterns in randomness pareidolia. It is the same impulse that makes us see faces in clouds or the man in the moon. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to impose order on chaos. Perhaps the Westford Knight is nothing more than an elaborate example of this, our imaginations, carving a knight where only cracks exist. But perhaps our pattern-seeking nature is not always a flaw. Perhaps it is sometimes the way forgotten truths resurface, urging us to look again, to question what we think we know, because the truth is this, whether real or imagined. The Westford Knight has already altered history not by changing the past, but by changing how we engage with it. Generations have gathered at the stone, storytellers and scholars alike, each adding their own layer to its legend. The stone has inspired books, lectures, debates, even pilgrimages. It has kept alive the tantalizing question, what if? And there is something undeniably compelling in the idea that beneath that stone lies the body of a medieval knight, buried in foreign soil, his memory preserved in the lines carved by his companions. Imagine the scene: weary travelers far from home, carrying the traditions of chivalry across the sea, pausing in grief to honor their fallen. By firelight, they carve into the granite, chiseling an image of sword and knight, knowing it must endure. Where words cannot, they leave behind no documents, no journals, no maps, only this carving, a silent marker of presence. If that were true, it would be one of the most extraordinary untold stories of human history. But even if it is not true, even if the lines are nothing more than the idle scratches of nature, the Westford Knight still matters. It matters because it reveals how hungry we are for mystery, how deeply we yearn to believe that history is not fully written, that there are still secrets waiting in the stones beneath our feet. The night is as much about us as it is about the 14th century. It reflects our need to connect the ordinary soil of Massachusetts with the grandeur of knights, voyages, and lost orders. And perhaps that is why the Westford Knight endures, not because it offers certainty, but because it refuses to. It lives in ambiguity, and in that ambiguity it draws us closer, forcing us to look longer, think deeper, wonder harder. It asks us whether we are willing to see beyond the obvious, whether we are prepared to entertain the extraordinary. In the end, the Westford Knight is both less and more than it appears. Less, because it may not be what the legends claim; more, because it has become a vessel for those legends, carrying them forward through time. Whether knight or crack, sword or fisher, it has etched itself into the imagination of generations. And that, perhaps, is the truest carving of all the carving it has left in our minds. So the stone remains half hidden, half revealed, silent, yet loud with questions. A memorial, or a mistake, a knight, or a natural fracture, a secret of the Templars, or the dream of New Englanders yearning for a link to medieval Europe. And as long as people are willing to kneel beside it, to trace the faint lines with their eyes, to whisper the stories passed down through centuries, the Westford Knight will never fade entirely. It will stand as a reminder that history is not only what is proven, but also what is pursued, that sometimes the greatest truths lie not in certainty, but in mystery. Beneath the quiet New England sky, where the seasons paint the same forests with ever-changing colors, the story of the Westford Knight takes on a new dimension. The carving itself, faint and half-consumed by time, lies at the heart of the mystery. Yet it is not just the stone that carries weight, it is the web of stories, interpretations, and possibilities spun around it. To understand the Westford Knight, one must explore not only the marks carved into the granite, but also the human imagination, the scholarship, and the debates that have unfolded over centuries. For in truth, the figure carved into the ledge is not a simple artifact. It is a mirror reflecting the hopes, the skepticism, and the yearning of every generation that has gazed upon it. Some see in its faint outline the unmistakable form of a medieval knight, complete with sword and shield. Others argue it is nothing more than the natural wear of stone, its design born of erosion and cracks, not of a mason's hand. This tension between belief and doubt is what gives the Westford Knight its power. It asks us not only to look at the rock, but to look inward, to question what we accept as possible and what we dismiss as legend. The first recorded mention of the carving is said to come from the late 19th century, though some claim the local townspeople had long whispered about its strange form. Accounts differ. Some say a school teacher first noticed the resemblance to a knightly figure. Others credit early antiquarians who wandered New England in search of curiosities that might prove old-world contact with the new. By then, the carving was already weathered, barely visible unless one stood close. Tracing the faint lines with careful eyes, the sword etched diagonally was perhaps the most convincing detail. The rest, the supposed outline of armor, the suggestion of a shield, seemed to appear or vanish depending on the angle of light. But even faint carvings can cast long shadows. Those who believed the figure to be intentional soon connected it to a tantalizing tale, the voyage of Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, and his companion, Sir James Gunn. According to this theory, Sinclair led an expedition across the Atlantic in the late 14th century, decades before Columbus. Gunn, a Scottish knight, was said to have perished during the journey, and his fellow travelers carved his likeness into the bedrock of Massachusetts to honor his memory. If true, then the Westford Knight would not simply be a carving, it would be a gravestone, a memorial marking the resting place of a medieval voyager. The idea electrified imaginations. Could it be possible that the Templars, after their order was disbanded in Europe, found new horizons in America? Could Sinclair's alleged voyage, long dismissed as legend, find tangible proof in this faint outline carved into New England granite? The narrative fit neatly with other threads of Templar lore, their supposed voyages to hidden lands, their rumored maps of distant shores, their ties to exploration and secrecy. The Knight became, for many, the silent testimony of a vanished chapter of history. Yet skepticism rose just as quickly. Geologists and archaeologists pointed out that stone, especially granite exposed to centuries of ice, rain, and wind, develops cracks and patterns that can mimic intentional carvings. They argued that the so-called sword was nothing more than a fissure, its straightness exaggerated by wishful thinking. The supposed shield, a patch of discoloration, the outlines of armor, shadows, tricks of light, perhaps even the human brain's tendency to find patterns, faces, figures, stories where none exist. In other words, the Westford Knight might be nothing more than pareidolia, the human impulse to see order in randomness. The debate quickly divided into camps. On one side stood believers, often amateur historians or enthusiasts of the Templar mystery, who felt the carving was far too deliberate to be natural. On the other side stood academics, who insisted the evidence was insufficient, the carving ambiguous, and the stories spun around it more folklore than fact. Between them lay the stone itself, silent and unyielding, refusing to confirm or deny either narrative. But the Westford Knight is not unique in sparking such controversy. Across New England, strange stone structures and carvings have fueled debates about pre-Columbian contact for generations. From the Newport Tower in Rhode Island to the enigmatic petroglyphs of Maine, local traditions often speak of ancient visitors, Vikings, Templars, even Phoenicians who left behind traces that official history struggles to acknowledge, whether genuine or not. These artifacts form a tapestry of mystery that challenges the conventional story of America's discovery. In this sense, the Knight is part of a broader phenomenon. It is less about the single stone and more about what it represents, the possibility of hidden history. For those who stand before it, the Knight becomes a portal to the imagination. They see in its outline not just a fallen warrior, but an entire narrative of exploration, bravery, and forgotten voyages. In its faint lines, they read a story of secrecy, of knowledge guarded across oceans, of maps lost and rediscovered, of a world far more connected than textbooks suggest. Yet even among believers, interpretations differ. Some argue the carving is indeed a memorial to Sir James Gunn. Others suggest it may have been carved later, perhaps by colonial settlers who wished to connect their new home to the romance of medieval legend. Still others see it as part of a broader network of Templar markers, a breadcrumb trail left across New England to signify their presence. Each theory has its supporters, each brings with it evidence sometimes compelling, sometimes circumstantial, but none can fully settle the question. And so the Knight endures, its mystery preserved by ambiguity. For in truth, the faintness of the carving is its greatest strength. If it were clearer, if the figure of the Knight stood unmistakable, his armor crisp, His sword undeniable, it would have long ago been claimed, catalogued, and explained. Instead, its uncertainty gives it life, it demands interpretation, and, in doing so, it becomes a living story, one that changes with each generation that discovers it. The townspeople of Westford themselves have lived alongside this legend for centuries. Some embrace it, weaving it into the identity of the town. Others dismiss it, tired of the endless arguments about whether the night is real or not. For school children, it is a story to be told on field trips, a reminder that even in the quiet hills of Massachusetts, the echoes of legend can be found beneath their feet. For historians, it is a puzzle, a case study in how artifacts real or imagined shape cultural memory. The night has also inspired art and literature. Writers have drawn upon its mystery to craft tales of lost explorers and hidden histories. Local poets have described it as a guardian, lying in the earth to watch over the land. Painters have attempted to capture its faint lines, emphasizing what the stone itself only suggests. In this way, the night has transcended its physical form. Whether carved by human hands or by nature itself, it has become a symbol, an icon, of mystery and imagination. And yet, as with all enduring mysteries, the night raises a deeper question. Why do we want it to be real? Why do we long for a night carved into the bedrock of Massachusetts? Perhaps it is because the night offers a connection to a past richer and more complex than the one we are taught. It suggests that history is not closed, that secrets remain hidden, waiting to be discovered. It reminds us that the world is still vast, that stories of forgotten voyages and lost civilizations may yet linger in the stones beneath our feet. For the believer, the night is proof that the boundaries of history can be crossed. For the skeptic, it is proof of the human tendency to create myths. For both, it is a story that refuses to be ignored. And so, as night falls over Westford, and the stone lies quiet in the earth, the night remains. Its lines, faint but enduring, continue to spark debates, inspire wonder, and challenge certainty. Is it the grave of a fallen knight, a clue that could rewrite the story of America's discovery? Or is it simply a trick of erosion, elevated into legend by human imagination? The stone does not answer. It does not need to. Its power lies in the silence, in the space between belief and doubt. For it is in that space between the faint outline of a sword and the cracks of granite, between the dreams of explorers and the caution of scholars, that the true story of the Westford Knight resides. It is not just the carving on the stone that matters, but the carving it makes in us, in our minds, in our histories, in our endless search for meaning in the mysteries of the past. And so the night keeps its vigil, a sentinel not just of Massachusetts, but of the human spirit's need for wonder, a figure carved into stone, or perhaps into the imagination, a story unfinished, waiting for those brave enough or curious enough to seek it. For generations, the carving in the bedrock at Westford has stood as a silent enigma, a puzzle that seems to resist every attempt at closure. Some who pass by see only a faint outline in the stone, nothing more than grooves etched by nature's patient hand. But for others, that same outline is unmistakable: the hilt of a sword, the curve of a shield, and the suggestion of a human figure clad in armor. If it is truly a knight, then the implications reach far beyond Massachusetts. They ripple outward into the great uncharted mystery of who set foot in the Americas before Columbus, and why their presence has been largely erased or forgotten. What makes the Westford Knight so enduring is not only the carving itself, but the story woven around it. This story begins with whispers of medieval voyages, with maps like the Zeno chart that seemed to hint at knowledge of Western lands. Long before the 15th century, it ties itself to legends of exiled Templars, knights, who fled persecution in Europe and may have sought refuge in distant, uncharted shores. The knight at Westford is often said to be one of these men, or at least the memorial of one. Specifically, many have linked the stone to Sir James Gunn, a Scottish nobleman and companion of Prince Henry Sinclair. The theory suggests that Sinclair and his company ventured across the Atlantic in the late 1300s, leaving behind this single, haunting clue, a knight carved into the stone of the New World. And so we find ourselves at a crossroads of interpretation. On one path, the carving is explained away as simple erosion, a product of cracks in the bedrock that merely resemble human form. On the other, it becomes a keystone in an alternative history, a fragment of evidence pointing toward a daring voyage centuries ahead of Columbus. Which path is true? That question is what keeps the Westford Knight alive in memory and imagination. But to understand how such a legend could take hold, we must imagine the mindset of medieval Europe. The Knights Templar, once among the most powerful military orders in Christendom, had been shattered in the early 1300s by the combined force of the French crown and the papacy. Branded heretics, stripped of wealth and power, many of their surviving members scattered. Some melted quietly into society, others, as the legends go, carried their knowledge, their rituals, and perhaps their ambitions into hidden corners of the world. If some of them turned to the sea, if they became sailors, explorers, or companions of adventurous nobles, then the Atlantic offered a horizon vast enough to conceal their movements. Prince Henry Sinclair of Orkney, so often tied to the Westford Knight narrative, is one such figure, surrounded by rumor. As ruler of the Northern Isles, he commanded ships and men accustomed to harsh seas. He had ties to the same networks of nobles who may have sheltered Templars. Some believe that he set out on an expedition westward, carrying with him companions from Scotland and beyond, including Sir James Gunn. The voyage, according to legend, brought them not only across the Atlantic, but deep into the wilderness of what would one day be known as New England. There, Gunn is said to have perished, and in his honor the carving at Westford was made. If true, this would mean that the stone is not just a curiosity, it is a gravestone, one of the oldest European memorials in all of North America. Of course, skeptics counter with force. They argue that no contemporary record exists of Sinclair's voyage. The carving itself is faint, ambiguous, and subject to interpretation. When photographed under shifting light or rubbed with chalk to bring out its details, the figure seems clearer, but without enhancement the lines blur into the natural texture of the rock. To archaeologists, that ambiguity speaks louder than legend. Without definitive proof, they argue, we cannot leap to the conclusion that a knight lies here. Instead, they urge caution, warning against the temptation of wishful thinking. And yet, despite these objections, the Westford Knight persists. In collective memory, it refuses to fade away, partly because it resonates so strongly with the human desire for hidden history. We want to believe that secrets lie beneath the surface, that the past holds stories untold by textbooks. The knight, carved or eroded, invites us into that imaginative space where the boundaries of official history dissolve into possibility. The simple act of standing before the stone, of seeing its faint grooves with your own eyes, becomes a personal confrontation with mystery. You must decide for yourself whether you believe in erosion or memorial, accident or intention. Over the years, local lore has only deepened the aura surrounding the knight. In the town of Westford, generations of residents have passed down stories, each adding a layer to the myth. Some describe how the carving seemed clearer in decades past, before weathering wore it down further. Others recall amateur archaeologists writhing with enthusiasm, sketching diagrams, and proclaiming bold conclusions. The site itself has become a modest point of pilgrimage, not grand or imposing, but quietly significant to those who care about the hidden corners of history. Tourists come not for spectacle, but for that peculiar shiver of standing before something unexplained. What makes the Westford Knight especially haunting is that it is both specific and elusive. It suggests a single individual, a knightly figure, tied to a name Sir James Gunn, yet at the same time it refuses to give us certainty. The carving holds no inscription, no date, no clear heraldry to anchor it firmly. Instead, it hovers in the in-between, forcing us to weave story into stone. In this way, it becomes not only a historical puzzle, but a mirror of our own desire for connection with the past. And if we allow ourselves to entertain the possibility, if we imagine that the carving truly does mark the grave of a fallen knight, then the implications spread outward like ripples in a pond. It would mean that transatlantic contact occurred. Long before Columbus, it would connect New England to Scotland, to the Templars, to a hidden current of history that official narratives have overlooked. It would suggest that the story of the Americas is not one of sudden discovery, but of long-forgotten crossings, memorialized only in scattered clues like the Westford Knight. The debate over this carving also echoes a larger tension in historical study, the clash between mainstream academia and alternative research. Scholars insist on evidence, on documented records and artifacts that can be verified. Legends and oral traditions are viewed with skepticism unless corroborated by hard proof. But history is rarely neat, and often the traces of the past are fragile, ambiguous, and easily dismissed. The Westford Knight embodies this tension. It is too faint to serve as proof, yet too compelling to ignore. It forces us to confront the limits of certainty, to admit that not all mysteries yield clear answers. And perhaps that is the true gift of the Westford Knight, not that it conclusively proves Templar voyages, but that it reminds us of history's vast silences. For every record preserved in parchment and ink, countless others have vanished. Fires destroyed monasteries, wars scattered archives, and the simple erosion of time has erased stories that once were common knowledge. Against this backdrop of loss, even the faintest carving in a New England stone takes on profound weight. It might be an accident of nature, or it might be a surviving thread of a tapestry that was otherwise torn away. As the sun sets over Massachusetts and shadows deepen across the old bedrock, one can imagine the knight not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a sentinel of mystery. His outline, whether carved or conjured by erosion, continues to watch silently. As centuries pass, children grow up hearing his story. Visitors pause in wonder. Researchers argue in journals and books. And through it all, the figure endures, half vanished yet never gone, carved into both stone and imagination alike. In the end, whether Sir James Gunn lies beneath the soil, or whether the rock has fooled generations with its patterns, the Westford Knight has already achieved immortality. He stands as a symbol of what we yearn for in history, a reminder that the past is vaster than we know, and that sometimes a simple shape in stone can open the door to an entire world of possibility. In the quiet heart of Newport, Rhode Island, in a patch of green now called Turo Park, there stands a circular ruin that has puzzled historians, inspired dreamers, and divided scholars for centuries. Its form is simple yet strange, a round stone structure resting on 8 arched legs, rising like a sentinel from another world. To the untrained eye, it could be dismissed as the remains of a colonial windmill, a curiosity but nothing extraordinary. Yet to others, it is one of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence that the New World was touched by Old World voyagers long before Columbus. This is the Newport Tower, sometimes called the Old Stone Mill, and its mystery runs deep. The tower is not large, yet it commands attention. Its circular upper chamber, now roofless, once rose nearly 30 feet into the air, supported on those 8 stout arches of rough field stone. The arches, with their rounded curves, create an open airy, base that makes the structure appear lighter than its mass suggests, as though it hovers above the earth. The walls are thick, the masonry irregular but durable, giving the impression of age. Within its upper chamber are narrow windows and odd niches, some facing the cardinal directions, others seemingly aligned with solar or lunar events. To walk beneath its arches is to feel transported. One is reminded not of the timber houses of colonial New England, but of something far older, the round churches of medieval Europe, the Templar chapels of Scandinavia, even the stone towers of Norse settlements. And it is this quality, that feeling of being out of place, that has kept the Newport Tower at the center of debate. On one side, there's the conventional explanation that the tower was built in the 17th century by Benedict Arnold, not the infamous traitor of the Revolution, but his great-grandfather of the same name, an early governor of Rhode Island. Arnold's will, dated 1677, makes reference to my stone-built windmill. To mainstream historians, this is decisive. The tower, they say, was simply a mill, designed after English models Arnold had seen in his youth. Its unusual design was an eccentric choice, nothing more. But from the very beginning, others were not so sure. Early antiquarians, explorers, and writers looked at the tower and saw something that did not belong in colonial America. Its arches, they argued, were far too sophisticated for a mere mill. Its resemblance to old-world chapels was uncanny, and the absence of any other structures like it in New England raised an obvious question. If it were just a mill, why was it the only one of its kind? By the 19th century, theories began to multiply. Some claimed it was built by Norsemen, remnants of Viking expeditions that had wandered farther than sagas recorded. Others tied it to Portuguese explorers, who may have left behind such a structure as a navigational landmark. But among these theories, one rose to dominate the popular imagination: the idea that the Newport Tower was a Templar chapel, constructed by Scottish voyagers in the 14th century. Long before Columbus, the story threads back to Henry Sinclair, the Scottish nobleman and alleged Templar sympathizer whose name we encountered earlier. With the Westford Knight, according to later accounts, Sinclair led an expedition across the Atlantic around the year 1398, bringing with him knights, masons, and scholars. If this tale holds even a fragment of truth, then Newport, situated in a sheltered bay, rich with natural harbors, would have been an ideal landing point. Some researchers imagine Sinclair's party erecting the stone tower as both a place of worship and a symbolic claim on the land, a mark of Christian dominion in a new world. Supporters of this view point to the architectural parallels. The tower's round shape echoes the form of medieval churches, themselves inspired by the circular Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, a form the Knights Templar held in reverence. The use of arches, unusual in colonial mills, is standard in Romanesque and Gothic chapels. Its elevated base, creating an open ground level beneath the main chamber, is more reminiscent of European ecclesiastical design than of industrial utility. But perhaps most striking are the alignments. Researchers have observed that certain windows and niches in the tower align with the rising sun on the winter solstice and with key lunar standstills. Such astronomical precision seems out of place in a mere windmill, but deeply in keeping with the Templar tradition of sacred geometry, in which architecture was designed to mirror the heavens. Was the Newport Tower an astronomical observatory, a chapel encoded with celestial symbolism? These questions keep the mystery alive. The skeptic's voice, however, is firm. Archaeological studies of the mortar used in the tower's construction have consistently dated it to the mid-17th century, aligning neatly with Arnold's lifetime. The will's reference to a stone-built windmill seems unambiguous. Furthermore, colonial mills with stone bases and circular forms do exist in Europe. and it is entirely plausible that Arnold had one copied for his estate in Rhode Island. To historians, the astronomical alignments are examples of pattern seeking, finding meaning where none was intended. After all, in any structure with multiple windows and niches, some will naturally line up with celestial events. And yet, despite the weight of scholarly dismissal, the legend will not die. It lingers because the tower is too strange, too suggestive. Unlike written documents or carved stones whose meanings fade, the tower is a full structure one can enter and walk through. It feels old, older than colonial New England, even if science insists otherwise. Its arches whisper of Europe, its proportions of sacred design. When the imagination meets stone, the result is enduring myth. Consider the way early travelers described it in the 18th and 19th centuries. Visitors to Newport marveled at the tower and speculated wildly about its origin. Was it built by the Norse explorer Leif Erikson, whose voyages had reached Vinland centuries earlier? Did Chinese sailors, as some speculative writers proposed, construct it as part of their global fleets? Each theory, however fanciful, testified to one truth. People instinctively felt the tower was older than America itself. The Templar hypothesis, however, gained particular traction because it fit into a broader web of clues. By linking the tower to Henry Sinclair, the Westford Knight, the Zeno map, and later the mysteries of Oak Island, believers wove a coherent tapestry, a secret medieval presence in North America. Hidden in plain sight, the tower was not just a ruin, it was a node in a sacred geometry stretching across oceans, a chapel aligned to the stars, a piece of evidence that the old world touched the new in ways history has forgotten. From this perspective, even the lack of documentation becomes suggestive. Of course, there are no colonial records of the tower before Arnold's will. Its origins were secret, known only to initiates. Of course, there are no artifacts. The Templars, masters of discretion, would have left little behind. To believers, absence is not evidence of falsity, but of deliberate concealment. And so the tower lives to lives. In the academic world, it is a colonial mill, dated, catalogued, and explained. In the popular imagination, it is a medieval chapel, a clue to hidden history. These two lives run parallel, never quite extinguishing one another. If you visit Newport today, you will find the tower at the heart of a small park, its stone arches weathered but still standing strong. Children play. Beneath it, tourists snap photos, and history buffs linger in quiet contemplation. The tower has become a symbol of mystery itself, a reminder that even in a land as young as America, the past is layered, contested, and rich with the possibility of secrets, perhaps in the end. That is the tower's true legacy. Whether built in 1400 or 1650, whether by Templars or colonists, it teaches us something profound about the way humans engage with history. We are not content with dry facts. We hunger for wonder. We want to believe there are hidden chapters, forgotten voyages, secret temples waiting to be rediscovered. The Newport Tower feeds that hunger, standing as a stone puzzle whose solution may never be agreed upon, but whose mystery enriches us all. And so it endures, a silent witness in stone. Scholars will continue to debate, dreamers will continue to believe, and the tower will continue to stand caught forever between windmill and chapel, between history and legend, between the world we know and the world we long to rediscover. The ocean has always been both a boundary and an invitation for the medieval mind. The Atlantic was not simply water, it was a liminal realm, a threshold between the known and the unknown, the visible world and the edge of creation itself. Some believed it was endless, a void into which ships would vanish, their sails swallowed by storms and sea monsters. Others whispered that it was a path, a road of water leading to undiscovered lands, places where the horizon never ended and riches awaited. It is against this backdrop that we return to the enigma of the Westford Knight. Too many. It is a curious carving on a Massachusetts hillside, a weathered outline of what may be a sword-bearing figure. But to others, it is more than a curiosity. It is a fragment of memory, a marker of loss, and if the legends are true, one of the earliest pieces of physical evidence for a transatlantic voyage undertaken not by Columbus, but by a Scottish nobleman connected to the suppressed order of the Knights Templar, Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney. The possibility of the crossing. Before we dive into the legend itself, we must ask the rational question: could such a voyage have even been made in the 14th century? The answer is unequivocally yes. History gives us a precedent: the Norse. By the year 1000, nearly 4 centuries before Sinclair's alleged voyage, Viking explorers led by Leif Erikson had established settlements in Greenland and Newfoundland. The site of Land's Ox Meadows in modern-day Canada remains the smoking gun in Norse village, complete with turf houses and iron-working furnaces. Here, in the far reaches of Newfoundland, Europeans lived, worked, and survived centuries before Columbus. The Norse achievement proves two things beyond doubt. First, that the Atlantic crossing was possible with medieval ships, and second, that knowledge of these lands could, in theory, have survived passed down in whispers, in maps, or in guarded traditions. When skeptics dismiss the idea of Sinclair or other Europeans reaching America, they are not rejecting possibility, they are rejecting memory. By the 14th century, shipbuilding had advanced even further. While Viking longships were sleek and durable, the sailing vessels of Sinclair's era were larger, with sturdier hulls and greater capacity for supplies. Navigation, too, had improved. Sailors used the magnetic compass, the astrolabe, and star charts. More importantly, the North Atlantic was not an impassable void, it was a known corridor, dotted with stepping stones. The Shetlands, the Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, and then Newfoundland. From there, the coast of Nova Scotia and New England beckoned just beyond the horizon. Thus, the question is not could they, but did they? Henry Sinclair and the Zeno brothers. Henry Sinclair was no ordinary noble. As Earl of Orkney, his lands stood on the frontier of Europe. The Orkneys were closer to Iceland than to London, and the sea was woven into every aspect of his domain. To the Sinclairs, the horizon was not an obstacle but a challenge. The legend holds that in 1398, Sinclair embarked upon a daring voyage westward, accompanied by Venetian navigators known as the Zeno brothers. Their role in the story is critical. Niccolo and Antonio Zeno were men of the sea, heirs to Venice's great maritime tradition. The Zeno family, long connected to exploration and trade, would later produce a curious document, the Zeno narrative and map, published in 1558. This map is one of the most controversial artifacts in cartographic history. It depicts not only Iceland and Greenland, but strange islands further west, places that align, some argue, with parts of Nova Scotia, Labrador, and even Massachusetts. To skeptics, it is a fabrication, perhaps cobbled together to glorify Venetian explorers in the wake of Columbus. To believers, it is a survival of knowledge deliberately obscured. If genuine, the Zeno map suggests that Henry Sinclair's expedition was real, and that his fleet charted lands across the Atlantic nearly a century before Columbus. The death of James Gunn. Here the Westford Knight enters the story. According to tradition, one of Sinclair's men, a knight named Sir James Gunn, died during the expedition in Massachusetts. To honor him, his companions carved a memorial into the local bedrock. The carving, as seen today, is faint, an outline of a sword, a figure, armor perhaps suggested in stone. Weathering has eroded much, but enough remains to fuel centuries of debate. Some argue it is natural striation, a trick of imagination. Others insist it is deliberate to precise, too intentional to be accident. If it is indeed a knight, the implications are enormous. It would mean that a European nobleman, fully armored, was buried in American soil in the late 14th century, long before Columbus, Cabot, or Cartier ever set sail. The Westford Knight would be both gravestone and proof, the last word of a voyage, otherwise erased from official memory. Echoes in Nova Scotia. The story does not end in Massachusetts. North along the Atlantic coast lies Nova Scotia, a land steeped in its own mysteries. Oak Island, famous for its hidden pit and tales of buried treasure, has long been linked to the Templars. Stone crosses scattered across the landscape, including the mysterious Venus alignments, suggest purposeful marking of sacred geography. Some researchers argue that Sinclair's expedition did not simply land and depart, but attempted to establish a base in Nova Scotia. From there, exploratory parties could have sailed southward, reaching Massachusetts, where James Gunn met his end. In this theory, the Westford Knight is not an isolated anomaly, but part of a chain. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, the Zeno map in Venice, Oak Island in Nova Scotia, and Westford in Massachusetts, each a fragment of a much larger mosaic. The silence of official history skeptics, however, are quick to point out the silence of the record. No definitive medieval chronicle describes Sinclair's voyage. No unambiguous European artifacts have been unearthed in Massachusetts soil. In academic circles, the story is dismissed as legend, at best an imaginative invention of later centuries. But history is not always written by those who lived it. More often, it is written by those with the power to decide which stories survive. If Sinclair's voyage was undertaken in secrecy, perhaps as a Templar mission to safeguard knowledge or treasures from the old world, it may never have been intended for wide record. Silence, in such a case, is not absence, it is strategy. Imagining the voyage to grasp the human scale of this story. Imagine the voyage itself. A fleet of ships leaving the Orkneys under a gray northern sky, sails swelling with wind, wooden hulls creaking as men loaded supplies, salted fish, dried grain, barrels of water and ale. Navigators check their instruments, the Zeno brothers, murmuring in Venetian dialect, the crew a mixture of Scots, Norsemen, and perhaps knights bound by old vows stood on deck, faces set against the cold spray. They sailed westward, first to the Faroes, then to Iceland, then to Greenland. Each landfall brought relief and peril, trading with locals, braving ice floes, repairing sails shredded by storms. At night, the stars burned above them, constellations, guiding their path across the endless dark. The northern lights shimmered, curtains of fire in the sky, as if the heavens themselves marked their passage. And then, after weeks of hardship, land appeared, a coastline unknown to Europe, forests stretching beyond the shore, rivers glinting like silver in the sun, birds wheeling overhead, fish teeming in the surf. To Sinclair's men, it must have seemed a new Eden, untouched, unclaimed, waiting. But paradise is never without. Price, illness struck, supplies dwindled, perhaps conflicts arose, either among themselves or with the native peoples they encountered. And in this crucible, Sir James Gunn fell. His death was a blow not just to his companions, but to the mission itself. To honor him, they carved his likeness into stone, a permanent reminder of their journey, and perhaps a sign to any who might come after. Why it matters? Why should we care about the Westford Knight or Henry Sinclair's voyage? After all, the Norse were already in America centuries before. What difference does it make if Sinclair arrived in 1398 instead of Columbus in 1492? The answer lies in the narrative of history itself. Columbus's voyage has long been celebrated as the moment Europe discovered the New World. a turning point in human history. But if others came before of Sinclair, and the Templars reached America nearly a century earlier, then the story is more complex. It suggests that knowledge of these lands existed, but was suppressed, forgotten, or deliberately hidden. It challenges the notion of sudden discovery and replaces it with a tapestry of crossings, encounters, and forgotten legacies. The Westford Knight, faint though it is, becomes a symbol of this hidden history. It is not just a carving. It is a question carved in stone. Who else came here before? The Atlantic as memory. The Atlantic Ocean, then, is not only a body of water, it is a memory field. Each wave carries echoes of forgotten voyages, Norse, Scottish, Phoenician, perhaps even Phoenician or Carthaginian in centuries long past. The sea remembers even when human archives do not. The Westford Knight is one such echo, a faint but persistent voice rising from stone. It reminds us that history is not neat. It is not the tidy sequence of events written in textbooks. It is messy, contested, and often deliberately edited. In the end, perhaps the true lesson of the Westford Knight is not whether Sinclair came or not, but that history is always larger than the stories we are told. Beneath every official account lies a deeper current, one that can carry us, if we are willing, into uncharted waters. Under the canopy of New England skies, the story of the Westford Knight continues to unfold. And with each chapter, the tale grows stranger, richer, and more uncertain. By now, the stone effigy has been studied, debated, praised, and dismissed countless times, but the heart of the mystery has never quite been pierced. To move forward, we must turn our attention not only to the figure carved into the rock, but also to the wider web of mysteries that surround it, other artifacts, other legends, and other whispers of contact between the old world and the new. Long before Columbus, if the Westford Knight were alone, it might be easy enough to brush aside, a curiosity to amuse locals and tourists alike. But when placed alongside the other puzzling relics of pre-Columbian America, it begins to form part of a much larger and more tantalizing picture. This chapter brings us face to face with that broader canvas of clues. For the Westford Knight is not a solitary enigma, it is a piece of a puzzle that stretches across oceans and centuries. To some, this carving connects directly to other mysterious artifacts that have surfaced in North America. The Kensington Runestone of Minnesota, with its Norse-like inscriptions, the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, an architectural anomaly that seems to echo medieval Europe more than colonial America, and the odd tales of maps, such as the Zeno map, which suggest transatlantic voyages far earlier than official history, records. Each of these is controversial, contested, and debated, but together they create a strange chorus of possibility. Could they all, in some way, be linked? Could they all point to forgotten journeys across the sea? The Kensington Runestone is perhaps the most famous of these supposed relics. Discovered in 1898 by a Swedish immigrant farmer in Minnesota, the stone bears runic inscriptions that seem to tell of Norse explorers traveling deep into the interior of North America in the 14th century. To mainstream historians, it is almost certainly a hoax, carved by Scandinavian settlers eager to tie their presence in the new land to ancient explorers. Yet, the stone refuses to fade into irrelevance. Some rhinologists claim the script reveals linguistic details unknown to a 19th century farmer, but entirely consistent with medieval Norse. Others argue the weathering of the stone's grooves suggests a much older origin. Whether hoax or genuine artifact, the Kensington Runestone continues to cast a long shadow over the question of who reached America. First, placed beside the Westford Knight, the Runestone raises unsettling questions. Could both be markers left by medieval travelers from Europe? If so, Then the idea of isolated voyages by Norse seafarers suddenly seems less like folklore and more like history. For those who believe in the Knight's authenticity, the runestone provides supporting evidence, a second voice in a conversation that crosses the centuries. Then there is the Newport Tower, a structure that stands in Rhode Island with an aura of defiance, circular, made of stone, with arches that echo designs seen in medieval churches. The tower has long been a magnet for speculation. Some claim it was a colonial windmill built in the 17th century. Yet its orientation, its proportions, and its unusual features have made others wonder if it was constructed much earlier, perhaps even by voyagers who brought old world architecture into the New World. The Newport Tower's windows align with solstices and stars, almost like an astronomical observatory. Its arches recall structures in Scotland linked to the Knights Templar. Once again, the mainstream insists on a simple explanation: a colonial windmill. Nothing more, but the alternative whispers persist. And when viewed alongside the Westford Knight, the Newport Tower becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes another piece of the same hidden story. Maps, too, enter this narrative. Chief among them is the mysterious Zeno map, said to date from the 16th century, but containing knowledge that seems far older. The map depicts parts of North America with surprising accuracy long before Columbus had supposedly opened the Atlantic routes. Skeptics argue that the map is a fabrication, a clever but flawed attempt to rewrite history. Believers counter that it preserves echoes of older voyages, perhaps even voyages by Templar-affiliated families, whose nautical knowledge was centuries ahead of its time. When we look at the Zeno map alongside the Westford Knight, a question emerges: was there a network of explorers hidden beneath the surface of history, leaving fragments of their story scattered across stone, parchment, and rumor? The legends of Sir James Gunn deepen the mystery further. According to one tradition, the Westford Knight commemorates Gunn, a Scottish nobleman who may have sailed with Henry Sinclair in the 14th century. Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, is himself a figure wrapped in legend, rumored to have led expeditions westward across the ocean, perhaps reaching Nova Scotia, New England, or beyond. If these tales are true, then the Knight may not simply be a random carving, but a genuine grave marker for a fallen member of this forgotten voyage. Imagine, then, the scene: a band of weary travelers far from home, laying to rest their comrade on the hard New England bedrock, marking his memory with chisel and stone. If so, the Knight is not just a curiosity, it is a testament to bravery, loss, and the human drive to cross the unknown. But for each argument in favor, there is one against. Scholars point out that erosion can create illusions. They argue the Knight is not a carving at all, but a natural pattern in the rock. They remind us that legends of Sinclair and Gunn only appear in later centuries, with little hard evidence to back them. They note that the runestone and the tower both have plausible mundane explanations. In the eyes of Orthodox history, these relics are outliers at best, frauds and fantasies at worst. The power of the mystery lies in the tension between these two views, the possibility of hidden truth and the certainty of skepticism. Yet, perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Westford Knight and its companions is the endurance of their story. For hundreds of years, people have been drawn to these enigmas, refusing to let them fade into obscurity. The runestone still attracts visitors in Minnesota. The Newport Tower remains a landmark of fascination. The Zeno map continues to provoke heated debates among cartographers and historians. And the Westford Knight lies quietly in Massachusetts, its faint outlines traced and retraced by generations of seekers. Together, they suggest that history is not as fixed, not as certain, as we often imagine. Beneath the official story lies another shadow history, half buried, waiting to be pieced together. This is why Chapter 8 turns its gaze outward. The Westford Knight is not just a mystery in isolation. It belongs to a constellation of enigmas, a network of artifacts and stories that span continents. To dismiss it outright is to ignore the possibility that history is richer, stranger, and more complex than we dare to admit. Could it be that explorers, whether Norse, Templar, or otherwise, reached America centuries before Columbus and left behind subtle traces of their presence? Could it be that the stones of Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Rhode Island all whisper fragments of the same forgotten saga? As night falls over the landscapes where these relics lie, the questions remain unanswered, yet they beckon us forward. The Westford Knight continues to rest in its bed of rock, silent but stubborn, part of a mystery larger than itself. To follow its story is to wander through a maze of possibilities, where erosion becomes legend, where maps hide secrets, and where towers defy explanation. And in that wandering, we glimpse something rare, the sense that history is alive, unfinished, and still holding secrets we have yet to uncover. The story is not yet over, for as we continue deeper into the enigma of the night, we find ourselves not only examining artifacts, but also confronting something more profound: the nature of belief, the power of imagination, and the possibility that our understanding of the past has been carefully pruned, leaving only the branches of history that fit the accepted narrative. The Westford Knight and its companions are the roots that remain, stubborn and unyielding, hinting at a forest we cannot yet see. And so, as this chapter closes, we are left standing among stones, maps, and legends, caught between erosion and intention, hoax and history, faith and skepticism. The night is still there, waiting. The run-a-stone still whispers, the tower still stands, the maps still hint, and we are still listening, piecing together what might be a forgotten epic of voyages, courage, and memory carved not only into stone, but into the very landscape of America. Here we stand, on the threshold of one of the most haunting and evocative chapters in our journey. If the Westford Knight raised questions about explorers, symbols, and forgotten voyages, then the place we turn to now, Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, presents us with a veritable cathedral of mysteries. Here, carved in stone, we encounter symbols so intricate, so baffling, that they seem to whisper of hidden knowledge encoded in architecture itself. And among these carvings, nestled between angels, vines, and sacred geometry, appear images that should not be their plants native to the Americas, carved decades before Columbus ever set sail. Corn, aloe, even cactus. How can this be? Chapter 9 brings us face to face with Rosslyn Chapel, a building that has inspired centuries of speculation. Built in the mid-15th century under the patronage of the Sinclair family, Rosslyn has long been associated with the Knights Templar, with Freemasonry, and with secret traditions that supposedly carried the wisdom of the old world into the new. To step into Rosslyn is to step into a kaleidoscope of stone, where every arch, every boss, and every column seems alive with meaning. It is not simply a church, it is a puzzle box, and within that puzzle box, some believe, lies proof of contact with the Americas long before Columbus. Let us begin with the plants. In the Lady Chapel, near the east end of the building, are carvings of foliage twined into arches and columns. At first glance, they appear to be nothing unusual, simply decorative flourishes, common in medieval churches. But when examined closely, certain leaves and fruits bear striking resemblance to plants that, in the 1400s, should have been entirely unknown in Europe. The most famous among these is maize, or corn, its distinctive cobs unmistakably carved into the stone. Other carvings appear to show aloe vera, and some even suggest prickly pear cactus. The implications of this are staggering. If these are indeed depictions of New World plants, Then Rosslyn Chapel becomes a kind of smoking gun, physical evidence that knowledge of the Americas existed in Europe before Columbus's voyage. But where could such knowledge have come from? One theory points directly to the Sinclairs themselves. Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, is said by legend to have voyaged across the Atlantic in the late 14th century, nearly a century before the chapel was constructed. If so, then his descendants, when building Rosslyn, may have encoded that knowledge into stone. In this interpretation, the carvings are not mere decoration, but a family legacy, a reminder that they had touched the far shores of another continent. Of course, mainstream historians are quick to counter. They argue that the carvings are stylized, depictions of common plants in Europe, wheat, ivy, or lilies, and that the supposed maize or aloe is simply the result of wishful interpretation. They caution against reading too much into ambiguous designs. And yet, even with this caution, the resemblance is uncanny enough that the debate has never truly been silenced. The mystery lingers, carved into the very bones of the building. But Rosslyn is not only about plants. The entire chapel seems designed to encode hidden meanings. Its architecture resonates with symbolism, intricate knotwork, depictions of angels playing musical instruments, a profusion of geometric forms. The apprentice pillar, one of its most famous features, is said to echo ancient legends of hidden knowledge and sacrifice. Some even claim that the layout of the chapel mirrors Solomon's Temple, a structure long revered by both Templars and Freemasons. In this view, Rosslyn is less a church and more a stone manuscript, each carving a letter. In a grand esoteric text, what makes Rosslyn so compelling in the context of our exploration is the way it connects the Templars, the Sinclairs, and the possibility of transatlantic voyages. The Templars, disbanded and persecuted in the early 14th century, are believed by some to have gone underground, carrying their wealth, their symbols, and their knowledge with them. Families like the Sinclairs, sympathetic to their cause, may have sheltered them and preserved their traditions. If Henry Sinclair truly sailed westward, perhaps with remnants of Templar knowledge or maps, then Rosslyn Chapel may stand as a memorial to that hidden journey. Consider, too, the timing. The chapel was begun in 1446, decades before Columbus's famous voyage in 1492. If the carvings do show American plants, then they were etched into stone at least half a century before the official discovery of the New World. Could this be coincidence? Could it be misinterpretation? Or could it be that the Sinclairs were quietly declaring, in symbolic form, a truth they dared not speak openly, that they had knowledge of lands across the sea? The legends surrounding Rosslyn only deepen the mystery. For centuries, the chapel has been associated with hidden treasures, secret vaults, and sacred relics. Some believe the Holy Grail itself may lie buried beneath its stone floors. Others whisper of ancient manuscripts, maps, and artifacts sealed away in chambers that have never been opened. The chapel's connection to the Freemasons adds yet another layer of intrigue, for Freemasonry has long claimed descent from both the Templars and the builders of Solomon's Temple. If Rosslyn encodes Masonic or Templar wisdom, then perhaps it also encodes knowledge of a world beyond the Atlantic. And let us not forget the role of myth. Stories of Henry Sinclair's voyage to America first gained prominence in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly through the writings of Johann Reinhold Forster and others who connected Sinclair to his Zeno map. According to these tales, Sinclair sailed to what is now Nova Scotia, explored the coastline, and left behind marks of his passage. If these stories hold any truth, then Rosslyn's carvings may not simply be decorative, but commemorative, a way of preserving in stone the family's proudest secret. The difficulty, of course, lies in the absence of definitive proof. Skeptics demand documentation, hard evidence, Contemporary records, none exist. The carvings are ambiguous, the legends are late, the connections tenuous. Yet the persistence of the story tells us something important. Rosslyn has become a symbol, not just of the Sinclairs, but of a larger yearning, the human desire to believe that our history is richer and more interconnected than we have been told. Walk through Rosslyn, and you will feel it. The atmosphere is charged, almost otherworldly. Light falls in strange patterns, catching on carvings that seem to shift and come alive. Angels, devils, vines, musical notes, faces both serene and grotesque. All of them call out to interpretation. And in the midst of this dizzying symphony of symbols, the New World plants stand quietly, challenging us to question what we think we know. The resonance of Rosslyn stretches far beyond its Scottish hills. For those who argue that the Templars or the Sinclairs reached America before Columbus, Rosslyn is their most tangible piece of evidence. It is a stone witness, unyielding to the passage of centuries, even if one rejects the claim. The very fact that the carvings can sustain such debate testifies to the power of mystery. Rosslyn draws seekers from around the world, each hoping to glimpse a fragment of hidden truth carved into its walls. And perhaps this is the ultimate legacy of Rosslyn Chapel. It stands not only as a building, but as a mirror reflecting back to us our deepest questions about history, faith, and the unknown. Did the Sinclairs cross the ocean before Columbus? Did the Templars preserve maps of the New World? Are the carvings truly maize and aloe, or are they wheat and lilies dressed up in myth? The stone does not answer. It only whispers. It only invites us to look closer, to wonder more deeply. As we leave Rosslyn behind, the story of pre-Columbian contact grows ever more tangled. The Knight in Massachusetts, the Runestone in Minnesota, the Tower in Rhode Island, and now the chapel in Scotland all seem to conspire. Like pieces of a puzzle scattered across time and space, each piece can be dismissed in isolation, but together, they weave a tapestry that is difficult to ignore. Rosslyn is not merely a church, it is a chapter in this hidden history, a stone song that refuses to fall silent. And so chapter 9 closes, not with answers, but with resonance. The maize still clings to its column. The aloe still twists in its arch. The cactus still lurks in its shadows. They remain unyielding, daring us to believe or daring us to doubt. In that tension lies the power of Rosslyn, and in that power lies the enduring fascination of the Templar mystery. The story of the Westford Knight, like so many great mysteries of history, is not confined to one place or one era. It stretches across centuries, crossing oceans, touching upon faith, secrecy, discovery, and the enduring power of memory. And in this chapter of our journey, we begin to see how the threads that have been woven so far of carved stone, disputed evidence, and tantalizing fragments of legend begin to connect to broader patterns, reaching into the very fabric of hidden history. For it is not enough to view the Westford Knight as an isolated curiosity, a single riddle inscribed on the bedrock of Massachusetts. To truly understand its significance, we must look outward, beyond Westford, beyond New England, beyond even the Atlantic itself, toward the larger story of the Templars, their survival, and the way their legacy may have seeded itself in unexpected corners of the world. The carving, whether weathered by time into ambiguity or not, is itself a starting point, a signal beacon that invites the seeker to look deeper. Imagine standing before that stone in silence, running your hand across its grooves. Perhaps you see the faint outline of a sword, perhaps a suggestion of armor, perhaps nothing more than cracks formed by erosion. But your mind, now attuned to the greater story, recalls other legends: the Kensington Runestone, the Newport Tower, Rosslyn Chapel, Oak Island. Each of these is like a piece on a scattered chessboard, separate and yet strangely aligned, whispering of a hidden design. And it is here that the Westford Knight takes on its true weight, not just as a controversial carving, but as a part of a possible network, a breadcrumb trail of symbols, marks, and mysteries. To understand how this trail might have been laid, we must look to the time when the Templars themselves ceased to exist, at least in name, in 1307. On the infamous Friday the 13th, the Knights were arrested across France. Their lands were seized, their leaders tortured, and their order dissolved by papal decree. And yet, in the ashes of that destruction, they did not vanish entirely. Ships disappeared from French harbors, brothers scattered across Europe, and their treasure, whatever it truly was never found. History tells us that men, especially those bound by oaths as powerful as the Templar vows, do not simply dissolve into nothingness. They adapt, they hide, they pass their secrets forward, in whispers and in symbols carved into stone. So the question emerges, if the Templars or their descendants in spirit, perhaps Freemasons or Sinclair voyagers, crossed the Atlantic before Columbus, why? What drove them to undertake such perilous journeys? And more importantly, how would they leave proof behind without breaking the secrecy that had preserved their survival? The Westford Knight may be one such proof, hidden in plain sight, a memorial disguised as natural rock until those with eyes to see came along. As we expand the view, the new world becomes not merely a destination, but a canvas upon which generations of seekers projected their hopes, fears, and imaginations. The Norse sagas already spoke of Vinland, the fertile lands west of Greenland. Maps from the 14th and 15th centuries hinted at coastlines long before Columbus set sail, and the oral traditions of native peoples across the Northeast sometimes recall encounters with pale-skinned strangers from across the sea, visitors who came and then vanished, leaving only fragments behind. Against this background, the Westford Knight begins to feel less like an outlier and more like one thread in a wider weave of forgotten contact. But what of the personal element? The name so often tied to this mystery, Sir James Gunn. In the story as it is told, Gunn was a companion of Prince Henry Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman linked to the legacy of the Templars and, by extension, to Rosslyn Chapel and its carvings of New World plants. Gunn, it is said, died during their supposed voyage to America in the late 14th century, and the carving in Westford is his memorial. Is this true history or invention? Historians remain divided. There is no direct record of Gunn's voyage. The evidence is circumstantial, built on oral tradition and interpretation, and yet the name persists, attached to the Knight like a shadow that cannot be shaken off. When we stand before the Westford carving, part of us cannot help but imagine Gunn's story, the weary knight, fallen in a strange land, his comrades carving his likeness into stone, so that he would not be forgotten, even if centuries of wind and rain sought to erase him. Such imagery resonates deeply, because at its core it is a human story. We are drawn to tales of courage, of sacrifice, of journeys into the unknown. And even if the carving is nothing more than erosion, the legend of the Westford Knight has sparked generations of curiosity, drawing the eye to connections that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. It is this spark that matters, for in seeking the truth of one stone, people have rediscovered questions that reach into the bedrock of history itself. In considering the Knight, we also have to weigh the voices of skeptics, for they form an essential part of the dialogue. Archaeologists, geologists, and local historians have examined the stone and declared it natural, a pattern created by glacial striations or random fractures. They argue that belief in the Knight rises more from a desire for mystery than from evidence. And yet, history shows us that skepticism, while vital, can also blind us to truths not yet proven. The Kensington Run of Stone was long dismissed as a hoax, Yet modern studies of its language have raised new debates. The Newport Tower was once thought to be nothing more than a windmill, yet its design continues to puzzle researchers. Time and again, what was once dismissed as legend has been later uncovered as fact, and so we must leave room for possibility, even as we scrutinize with reason. One of the most compelling aspects of the Westford Knight is not the carving itself, but the way it anchors a network of myths and memories that span continents. The stone becomes a focal point where European legend meets American landscape, where the old world and the new collide in an ambiguous imprint. It is both a question mark and an invitation. What else lies hidden, waiting to be recognized? What other carvings, ruins, or alignments may have gone overlooked because we lack the right lens to interpret them? In this sense, the Westford Knight embodies the nature of hidden history itself. History is not a straight line, but a tapestry woven from many strands, some bright, some faded, some deliberately concealed. Official records tell one story, but whispers, artifacts, and anomalies tell another. And it is in these anomalies that we often find the most profound insights, because they remind us that the past was never as simple as textbooks would have us believe. As our exploration of the night draws deeper, we begin to see it not only as a question of fact versus fiction, but as a mirror reflecting our own hunger for connection to something larger. Why do we yearn to believe that the Templars came to America? Perhaps it is because their story itself embodies both loss and survival, destruction and endurance. Their order was crushed, yet their legacy lives on in legend, in architecture, in secret societies. To imagine that they reached the shores of a new world centuries before the age of exploration is to extend that legacy further still, to grant them a role in shaping the very narrative of discovery. And whether or not this is true in the literal sense, the idea itself has power. Legends are not created in a vacuum. They arise where there is fertile ground, where symbols resonate, where patterns suggest themselves. The Westford Knight, whether carved by human hand or by nature's slow artistry, has become such a symbol, and symbols, once seated, grow roots. Deeper than stone, standing at the site today, you might notice how ordinary the surroundings are. A patch of ground in a quiet New England town, unmarked by grandeur, far removed from the epic imagery of crusader knights and oceanic voyages. Yet in this ordinariness lies its strength. The Knight reminds us that history is hidden in the everyday, that the extraordinary often lies beneath the surface of the ordinary, that a stone in a small town can contain a story that stretches across the Atlantic and back into the depths of time. In this way, the Westford Knight is not only about the past, it is also about us, here and now. It challenges us to consider how we view history, as a fixed record or as a living mystery. It reminds us that the stones beneath our feet may still have voices, if only we learn how to listen. And it leaves us with the same lingering question that has haunted so many seekers before. What if the story we have been told is only half the truth? As the night deepens and the stars emerge above Westford, one cannot help but imagine those same stars shining down upon the men who may have carved the figure centuries ago. Perhaps they whispered prayers as they worked, invoking saints and guardians to bless their fallen brother. Perhaps they looked to the constellations for guidance, seeing in them the same sacred patterns that guided the Templars across oceans and deserts. And perhaps, just perhaps, they knew that their work would one day stir the curiosity of those yet unborn, calling them across centuries to ask the same questions we ask now. This is the gift of the Westford Knight. It may never yield definitive answers, but in its ambiguity lies its magic. It draws us into the timeless dialogue between certainty and mystery, between skepticism and wonder, and in doing so, it keeps alive the possibility that history is larger, stranger, and more mysterious than we have been taught to believe. It keeps alive the possibility that somewhere in the cracks of stone and time, the truth of the Templars' journey to America may still lie waiting, just out of reach, daring us to keep searching. Beneath the weight of centuries, the story of the Westford Knight continues to unfold like an old tapestry, its threads frayed, its colors muted, yet still capable of revealing a profound and mysterious image. In the decades after the carving first captured the attention of antiquarians and local historians, a stream of new interpretations flowed into the discussion, each more daring than the last. What had once been dismissed by many as a weather-worn patch of granite became the center of speculation involving ancient voyages, sacred brotherhoods, and even encoded symbols hidden beneath the stone itself. As we move deeper into this chapter of the tale, we find ourselves balancing on the threshold of history and imagination, caught in the tension between what can be proven and what continues to tantalize the human need for mystery. By the early 20th century, interest in the Westford Knight had risen again, fueled in part by a cultural fascination with lost civilizations, ancient mysteries, and romanticized visions of medieval chivalry. This was a time when discoveries, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, Schliemann's excavation of Troy, and even speculative works on Atlantis filled the public imagination. Against this backdrop, the idea of a knight's effigy carved into a Massachusetts hillside no longer seemed so outlandish. Writers and lecturers began to weave the carving into tales of exploration, suggesting that it could be linked to forgotten expeditions from Europe centuries before Columbus. For some, the most compelling theory connected the figure not just to a nameless knight, but to a very specific man, Sir James Gunn, a companion of Prince Henry Sinclair of Scotland. Gunn was believed to have traveled across the Atlantic in the late 14th century on an expedition that sought new lands and opportunities beyond the Western Ocean. According to certain versions of this story, Gunn died in the New World, far from home, and the carving in Westford was created as a memorial to honor him. The stone itself, then, was not random nor accidental. It was deliberate, sacred, and deeply personal. For believers in this narrative, the effigy represented nothing less than a permanent record of a Templar-linked voyage to America. The connection to Henry Sinclair was especially significant. Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, had long been associated with theories of pre-Columbian exploration. Some researchers linked him directly to the Knights Templar, whose order had been suppressed a generation earlier, but whose influence and symbols lingered in hidden circles. Across Europe, the idea that Sinclair could have led an expedition across the Atlantic, carrying Templar ideals, knowledge, or even treasure, became a powerful motif in alternative history. If the Westford Knight truly depicted Sir James Gunn, then the site in Massachusetts was more than a curious carving. It was a stone clue pointing toward a forgotten chapter in world exploration. The evidence, however, was not as straightforward as many would have liked. Close examinations of the stone revealed faint lines, some appearing to outline a sword, a shield, or even parts of a suit of armor, yet weathering and erosion blurred these details, leaving much to interpretation. Photographs taken in different lighting conditions often showed vastly different impressions. What looked like a sword in one image appeared as a simple crack in another. To skeptics, this was proof that the knight was nothing more than the human tendency to see patterns where none exist, much like shapes in the clouds. But to believers, the very persistence of these outlines, despite centuries of wear, suggested that something deliberate had once been etched into the rock. One of the more intriguing aspects of the debate involved the sword. Some claimed that the outline of the weapon was not generic, but bore characteristics of a medieval broadsword, the type that would have been carried by a knight in the late 14th century. Others argued that the carving was consistent with effigies found in Europe, particularly in Scotland, where knights were sometimes commemorated with stone carvings depicting their likeness and arms. These parallels lent weight to the idea that the Westford effigy was indeed the work of European hands. The story did not stop at historical comparisons. As the 20th century progressed, writers began to layer myth upon myth, connecting the Westford Knight not just to Prince Henry Sinclair, but to broader narratives involving the Templars, the Grail legends, and even Freemasonry. Each new theory expanded the scope of the carving's significance, transforming it from a local curiosity into a linchpin in grand tales of hidden knowledge and lost voyages. Some suggested that the site was part of a larger network of sacred geography, a point on a map designed to encode esoteric truths about humanity's spiritual journey. At the same time, archaeologists and professional historians remained cautious. They pointed out that no definitive artifacts had been uncovered in Westford that could be tied directly to medieval Europeans. Without material evidence, tools, pottery, weapon fragments, the carving remained an anomaly. The story of Gunn and Sinclair, while fascinating, was derived largely from later writings and folklore rather than contemporary documents. In the academic world, these gaps in the record left the theory standing on uncertain ground. Yet the absence of proof only seemed to fuel public fascination. To many, the Westford Knight symbolized the very essence of mystery, a tangible relic that resisted easy explanation, a puzzle that invited speculation but refused resolution. Visitors to the site reported feeling a sense of awe, as if the stone carried an energy of its own, whispering of forgotten voyages and untold histories. Local legends grew richer with each telling, until the carving became not just a disputed artifact, but a cultural landmark, embodying the town's connection to the mysteries of the past. The late 20th century brought new tools to the investigation. Researchers employed techniques like rubbings, tracings, and even laser scanning in attempts to capture the carving's details with greater accuracy. These methods often confirmed the presence of lines and depressions, but the interpretation of those marks remained subjective. Some scans suggested that the figure could indeed represent a human form, complete with sword and shield. Others concluded that the markings were too irregular to support such a reading. Meanwhile, the story of the Westford Knight continued to travel far beyond Massachusetts. Books, television documentaries, and online forums all carried the tale to new audiences, many of whom saw it as part of a larger reevaluation of pre-Columbian history. Alongside the Kensington Run of Stone, the Newport Tower, and the legends of Oak Island, the Westford Knight became a fixture in discussions of possible early European contact with North America. For those who embraced these alternative narratives, the carving was one more piece of a vast puzzle that hinted at centuries of forgotten exploration. At times, the debate grew heated. Local historians who defended the Knight theory clashed with skeptics who dismissed it outright. Academic conferences occasionally touched on the subject, though often with a degree of skepticism that bordered on dismissal. Yet even as the controversy simmered, the carving itself remained a silent presence in the stone, unchanging, unaffected by the arguments swirling around it. And perhaps that is where its greatest power lies. The Westford Knight, whether genuine or illusory, forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge. It stands as a reminder that history is not always neat, not always fully recorded, and that sometimes the stones themselves carry whispers of forgotten stories. Even if the carving is nothing more than the product of erosion, its impact on imagination and culture is undeniable. It has inspired generations to wonder, to question, and to seek hidden truths in the margins of history. In this way, the Westford Knight transcends the question of authenticity. It becomes a symbol not just of exploration or medieval legend, but of humanity's enduring fascination with mystery itself. The carving invites us to lean closer, to look harder, and to listen for voices that may have been silenced by time. Whether those voices belong to Sir James Gunn, to unknown explorers, or to the imagination of those who see a knight in the stone, they are part of a larger story, one that connects us to the ancient, human impulse to search for meaning in the world around us. And so the stone waits, patient and unmoving, as the centuries roll on. Scholars may debate, skeptics may dismiss, and believers may proclaim, but the carving endures, unchanged by their arguments. It is a testament to mystery, a challenge to certainty, and a reminder that history is not always a closed book. Some pages remain half-written, waiting for us to turn them, to fill in the gaps with discovery, or perhaps simply with wonder. That is the legacy of the Westford Knight, not a definitive answer, but an eternal question, etched in stone beneath the Massachusetts sky. The story of Oak Island has long hovered at the edge of history and legend, a place where whispers of hidden treasure blur into tales of curses, secret societies, and forgotten maps. Tucked away on the southern coast of Nova Scotia, the small, forested island seems almost unremarkable at first glance. Its shores are quiet, its trees whisper in the Atlantic wind, and its shape is not especially distinct from any of the countless other islands that dot the coast. And yet, for more than 2 centuries, Oak Island has drawn the attention of treasure hunters, scholars, adventurers, and dreamers. At the heart of this fascination lies the infamous Money Pit, a shaft that has swallowed fortunes, time, and lives, all while giving up only fragments of its story. The tale begins in the late 18th century, when a young man named Daniel McGinnis wandered onto the island and discovered a depression in the ground beneath an old oak tree. Suspended above the depression, according to legend, was a block and tackle, the kind of rigging one might expect aboard a ship. Intrigued, McGinnis and a few friends began to dig. Almost immediately, they noticed something unusual. At intervals of 10 feet, they found layers of logs laid carefully across the shaft, as if someone had deliberately constructed platforms to conceal or protect something deeper below. Word of their discovery spread quickly, and by the early 19th century, investors and work crews had been assembled to pursue what everyone assumed must be a buried treasure. As the diggers pushed deeper into the earth, they continued to encounter the same pattern: layers of logs interspersed with layers of clay, charcoal, or coconut fiber materials that suggested careful engineering rather than natural deposition. The sense of deliberate design only grew stronger, and with it, the certainty that something valuable had been hidden in the pit. By the time the shaft reached a depth of 90 feet, the excitement had grown to fever pitch. There, embedded in the wall of the pit, the diggers discovered a flat stone covered in symbols. No one could read the inscription at the time, but local lore quickly filled in the gaps. Later interpretations of the stone's markings claimed they spelled out a chilling message: 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. This inscription, whether authentic or a product of later embellishment, became one of the most famous clues in the Oak Island saga. It suggested not just treasure, but immense wealth enough to justify every ounce of labor and risk. But just as anticipation reached its peak, disaster struck. When the crew attempted to dig deeper, water began flooding into the shaft at an alarming rate. Pumps were brought in, but the water level refused to drop. It soon became clear that whoever had built the pit had designed it with an ingenious defense system, a network of flood tunnels that connected the shaft to the ocean. Each time the workers tried to bail out the pit, the sea rushed back in, defeating their efforts. What had seemed like a straightforward dig was now revealed to be a masterpiece of engineering, a trap laid centuries earlier to protect whatever lay hidden below. This pattern would repeat again and again over the following decades. Each new expedition arrived armed with hope, money, and improved technology, only to be thwarted by the relentless flooding of the pit. Diggers tried to bypass the flood tunnels by sinking parallel shafts, by damming the shore, by driving iron caissons into the ground. Each time, the island seemed to fight back, its defenses unyielding. The cost in human lives was tragically high. At least 6 men are known to have died during attempts to unearth the mystery, lending weight to the chilling rumor that the island bore a curse, that 7 must die before the treasure would be revealed. If the engineering of the pit was impressive, the tantalizing fragments found along the way only deepened the enigma. Coconut fiber, not native to Nova Scotia, was found in abundance, suggesting contact with tropical regions. Fragments of parchment, scraps of leather, and even traces of gold were reported by various expeditions. These were not mere natural oddities. They hinted at human hands, careful concealment, and treasures hidden just out of reach. Yet never enough was found to provide closure. Each discovery seemed only to feed the hunger for more, keeping the legend alive. Speculation about the pit's builders has ranged across centuries and continents. Some have argued that it was the work of pirates. Captain Kidd's name is often invoked, as are the stories of other notorious buccaneers who prowled the Atlantic. In the 17th century, others suggest it was a hiding place for valuables seized during wars, or even a vault built by the French during their struggles with the British. But the most enduring and romantic theory ties Oak Island to the Knights Templar. According to this idea, the Templars, after their suppression in the early 14th century, fled Europe with immense treasures, possibly including sacred relics, such as the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, seeking a safe and remote hiding place. They are said to have sailed across the Atlantic, eventually depositing their hoard in Nova Scotia. The Money Pit, with its complex flood tunnels and layered defenses, fits perfectly with the Templar reputation for advanced engineering and secretive operations. Supporters of this theory point to the island's proximity to other supposed Templar-linked sites, such as the mysterious cross-shaped arrangement of stones in nearby fields, and the carved symbols found on the island itself. The possibility that Oak Island's treasure is not merely gold and jewels, but sacred relics or esoteric knowledge, has made the story resonate far beyond the usual boundaries of treasure hunting. It transforms the island from a site of potential wealth into a place of world historical significance, a nexus where the lost legacy of the Templars might be recovered. For believers, every setback in the dig is not just bad luck, but part of a grand design, a system built by men who intended their secret to survive until the right time. Yet for every supporter of the Templar theory, there are skeptics who point out the lack of definitive artifacts. Despite centuries of digging, no great hoard has been uncovered. No Templar crosses or relics have been pulled from the earth. Critics argue that the supposed evidence that inscribed stone, the parchment fragments, the stories of gold has often been reported secondhand, with few surviving examples available for study. Some go further, suggesting that the entire story of the Money Pit may have grown from an initial misunderstanding or exaggeration, expanded by centuries of speculation into the legend we know today. Still, even the skeptics cannot deny the ingenuity of the pit's design. The flood tunnels remain one of its most baffling features. How could such a complex system have been built in an era before modern pumps, machinery, or diving technology? Whoever constructed it must have had remarkable knowledge of engineering and must have invested enormous effort to create such an elaborate trap. Whether their goal was to protect treasure, to store supplies, or to conceal something far stranger. The achievement itself speaks of deliberate planning. Modern efforts to solve the mystery have combined archaeology with technology. Borehole drilling has brought up wood, metal, and even fragments that some interpret as man-made artifacts. Ground-penetrating radar has hinted at voids and structures beneath the surface. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, television crews and private investors have kept the story alive for new generations. Oak Island has become as much a stage for human drama as it is a site of historical investigation, a place where persistence collides with mystery year after year. What fascinates most is not simply the possibility of treasure, but the sense that Oak Island is guarding a story too big to ignore. It is a riddle written into the earth, daring humanity to solve it. The secrecy, the layers, the traps all seem designed not only to conceal, but to test. And that is why the legend continues, because Oak Island represents the eternal struggle between curiosity and secrecy, between those who seek to uncover the past and those who sought to bury it forever. And so, the island waits, the trees sway, the waves lap against its shores, and beneath the soil lies a mystery that has defied every attempt to reveal it. Whether the treasure is gold, relics, or simply the persistence of a story too powerful to die, Oak Island remains one of the world's greatest enigmas. It is a reminder that the past is never entirely lost, but sometimes buried, waiting for hands brave enough or foolish enough to dig. If Oak Island is the great mystery that refuses to yield its secrets, then the Zeno map is the clue that seems to offer a key, but a key whose teeth are crooked, whose metal is worn, and whose origins are as murky as the waters it depicts. For centuries, scholars, cartographers, and seekers of hidden history have wrestled with this strange document, trying to decide whether it is a hoax, a forgery, or a genuine glimpse into voyages that predate Columbus. It is a puzzle written in ink and parchment rather than earth and stone, but it is no less tantalizing for that. The Zeno map takes its name from the Venetian brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, members of a prominent seafaring family in the late 14th century. According to the story, the brothers embarked on a voyage across the North Atlantic around 1390, sailing under the command of a mysterious prince named Zikmni. Their adventures were supposedly recorded in letters sent home, which lay hidden in Venetian archives for more than a century before being published in the mid-16th century by a descendant, Niccolo Zeno the Younger. When the younger Zeno revealed the letters and the accompanying map in 1558, Europe was already in the grip of exploration fever. Columbus's voyages had transformed the imagination of the Old World. Cabot and Cortez had pushed the boundaries further, and maps of the Atlantic were eagerly studied for hints of yet more undiscovered lands. Against this backdrop, the Zeno map appeared like a thunderclap. Here, it seemed, was evidence that voyages to the New World had been made long before Columbus, and by Italians no less. The map depicts not only Greenland and Iceland known lands by the 14th century, but also several strange islands scattered across the Atlantic. Most intriguing among them is a large, mysterious island called Friesland, lying southwest of Iceland. Friesland does not appear on modern maps because it does not exist, at least not in any geographical sense, yet it is drawn on the Zeno map in detailed form, complete with bays, promontories, and settlements. The letters describe it as a land of plenty, rich in resources and strategically located for seafaring. Then there is Estodland, a landmass drawn far to the west across the Atlantic. According to the letters, Estodland was a vast, fertile land inhabited by people who engaged in trade and had books written in an unfamiliar script. Even further south, another land called Drogeo is mentioned, where the inhabitants are described as fierce cannibals to a 16th century European audience. These names suggested contact with lands across the Atlantic, lands that bore more than a passing resemblance to parts of North America, for those who wish to believe in pre-Columbian transatlantic voyages. The Zeno map is a treasure chest of possibilities. Could Friesland have been a distorted memory of Greenland, the Faroe Islands, or even a phantom island sighted in the fog and mistakenly recorded? Was Estodeland in fact Newfoundland, Labrador, or Nova Scotia? Seen decades before Cabot's landing in 1497, was Drogeo a garbled reference to reports of the Americas, carried back by Norse voyagers centuries earlier? Each possibility raises further questions, blurring the lines between fact and fable. Supporters of the Templar theory seize on the Zeno map with particular fervor. If the Sinclair family of Scotland, long rumored to have ties to the Templars, was connected to the Zeno voyages, then the map may be a record of the Templars' secret westward exploration. Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, has been identified by some as the enigmatic Prince Zichnai described in the letters. According to this interpretation, Sinclair commanded the Zeno brothers on a voyage across the Atlantic around 1398, nearly a century before Columbus. If this is true, then the Sinclair Templar legacy would have extended across the ocean, linking Rosslyn Chapel, Oak Island, and the very geography of the New World. The allure of this theory is obvious. It would mean that the Templars or their descendants had not only escaped persecution in Europe, but had established a foothold in America, leaving behind maps and markers for those who would follow. The Zeno map becomes not just an old piece of parchment, but a smoking gun, a cartographic relic of a hidden history. And yet, like Oak Island's money pit, the map resists certainty. From the beginning, critics accused Niccolo Zeno the Younger of fabricating the whole thing. Why, they asked, had these remarkable letters and maps remained unknown for more than 150 years, only to surface at a time when interest in exploration was at its peak? Why did the map include places that do not exist, phantom islands like Friesland, that later cartographers copied uncritically onto their own charts? Was the entire story merely an attempt to insert the Zeno family into the great narrative of exploration, ensuring their legacy alongside Columbus, Cabot, and Vespucci? The presence of Friesland is particularly damning in the eyes of skeptics. For centuries after the Zeno map's publication, Friesland appeared on European maps as if it were real. Only later, with more accurate surveys of the North Atlantic, was it erased, its bays and harbors evaporating into the blank sea. How, critics ask, could an authentic 14th century voyage have mistaken a non-existent island for a substantial landmass? Unless, of course, Friesland was not entirely invented, but a distorted rendering of another place, perhaps part of Greenland drawn to far south, or a sailor's mirage elevated into cartographic fact. Even so, the map refuses to be dismissed entirely. Some modern scholars argue that while the details may be flawed, the broad strokes suggest genuine knowledge of lands west of Europe. The description of Estodeland, with its fertile lands and literate inhabitants, does not perfectly match any known indigenous culture of northeastern America, but it evokes enough parallels to keep the debate alive. Likewise, the letter's references to storms, ice, and long voyages across open sea resonate with the experiences of Norse seafarers, whose presence in Vinland is well attested. The possibility that the Zeno brothers heard stories from Norse sailors and embellished them cannot be ruled out. In that case, the map may not reflect voyages they personally undertook, but rather tales woven together from multiple sources. This would explain both the plausibility of some details and the glaring errors of others. Yet for those who search for traces of the Templars, even second-hand knowledge could be significant. If the Zenos recorded Norse accounts of Western lands, and if Sinclair or Zichnai was indeed part of their company, Then the map preserves a thread of continuity between the Templars of Europe and the explorers of the Atlantic. Like Oak Island, the Zeno map occupies a liminal space between history and legend. It is not a clear record, nor is it a simple forgery. Instead, it hovers in the gray area where memory, ambition, and imagination intertwine. It invites us to consider the possibility that the world was larger and more interconnected than official narratives suggest, that maps are not merely instruments of navigation, but also vessels of secrecy. For centuries after its publication, the Zeno map influenced cartography in subtle but significant ways. Explorers carried copies, mapmakers drew upon its features, and the phantom island of Frisland lingered stubbornly in atlases long after its reality had been disproven. In this sense, the map shaped the very way Europeans imagined the Atlantic world, guiding voyages and inspiring speculation. It may not have been accurate, but it was powerful. The greatest power of the Zeno map lies in its ambiguity. Like the inscribed stone of Oak Island, it offers just enough to suggest a hidden truth, but never enough to confirm it. Each generation of scholars and seekers projects onto it their own hopes and theories, seeing in its faded ink the reflection of their desires. For some, it is evidence of Venetian daring; for others, proof of Norse endurance; for still others, a secret Templar chart pointing the way to America. In this way, the map becomes less a document than a mirror, reflecting the hunger of those who gaze upon it. And so, the Zeno map joins the gallery of enigmas that haunt the story of the Templars. In America, like the Kensington Runestone, the Newport Tower, and Oak Island, it demands interpretation, challenges orthodoxy, and teases the imagination, whether authentic or forged. Whether drawn from experience or invention, it reminds us that maps are never neutral. They are declarations of knowledge, power, and intent, and sometimes they are whispers of secrets too dangerous or too precious to be spoken outright. The forests of Massachusetts have always held an air of quiet mystery. Even before the arrival of European settlers, these lands were sacred, alive with the stories of native peoples who saw spirits in the stones, omens in the rivers, and voices in the wind that moved through the pines. By the time colonists carved towns and farms out of the wild terrain, the soil was already layered with countless years of myth and memory. And it is within this setting, between the echoes of the ancient past and the ambitions of the new world, that the story of the Westford Knight begins to take on new depth. For what is carved into that bedrock is not just a faint outline of sword and shield, but a portal into questions that pierce through centuries of history. The legend of the knight spreads slowly, almost like smoke drifting over time. The earliest settlers of the region may not have immediately noticed the strange markings on the ledge. For them, survival demanded every ounce of energy harvesting, hunting, and carving out shelter. Yet, as generations passed and eyes began to wander, whispers grew about the strange shapes that seemed too precise, too deliberate, to be the mere work of erosion. Farmers passing the stone spoke of what looked like a sword, its hilt pointing upward, carved with intention. Some swore they could see armor etched faintly into the surface, the figure of a man lying in eternal rest. Was it a natural quirk, or the marker of a presence that should not have been there? To the local communities, such mysteries took on lives of their own. Children gathered around fires and listened to elders tell of a knight who had crossed the sea only to die far from home, buried in the wilderness with his weapon beside him. The image painted by such tales was vivid. A lone warrior, armor dented from travel, eyes fixed on the horizon of an unfamiliar land before succumbing to fate in a foreign forest. It was the kind of story that took root easily, for it carried within it the elements of tragedy, bravery, and the unknown. Every person who gazed at that stone could imagine their own version of who the knight might have been, but as the centuries passed and as scholars began to take a closer interest in the mysteries of the Americas, the story of the Westford Knight was pulled into larger debates. It was no longer just a local curiosity whispered among families. It became part of a question that has haunted history. Did Europeans set foot in the New World long before Columbus? And if so, who were they, and what legacy did they leave behind? Suddenly, the weathered lines of the stone became more than markings. They became potential evidence fragments of a forgotten chapter that could alter the timeline of exploration itself. The theory most often tied to the carving is that of the Sinclair voyage. According to some accounts, Henry Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman with ties to the Knights Templar, sailed westward in the 14th century, seeking lands beyond the horizon. With him, it is said, came trusted men, adventurers, and perhaps even exiled knights whose order had been broken by the power of kings and the Pope. If such a voyage truly took place, then the stone at Westford might be the grave marker of one of his companions, Sir James Gunn, a knight who perished on American soil. The carving of sword and shield, faint though it may be, would then stand as a silent memorial proof that these men walked the forests of New England long before the sails of Columbus appeared in the Caribbean. Skeptics, of course, are quick to remind us that erosion is a masterful sculptor. They argue that the shapes seen in the rock are illusions of the eye, wishful projections cast by those who long for mystery. They point out that stone, weathered by centuries of wind, rain, and frost, can produce patterns that mimic deliberate carvings. To them, the so-called knight is not a warrior from a distant land, but an accidental shape, given life only by the human need for story. And yet, even these skeptical voices cannot fully erase the sense of intrigue that lingers over the site. For once the idea of a knight takes root, once the mind accepts the possibility of armor and sword beneath the moss, the image is nearly impossible to banish. It is here that the Westford Knight becomes more than stone. It becomes a mirror for our imagination, reflecting our hunger to believe that history is not as settled as it seems. Every visitor who bends down to trace the grooves in the rock with their fingertips brings their own perspective. Some feel reverence, as if standing before a forgotten grave. Others feel excitement, the thrill of brushing against a secret hidden from the pages of textbooks. And still others feel doubt, wondering how much of what we see is shaped by the desire for wonder rather than the weight of evidence. The debate itself is part of the story. For centuries, human beings have looked at ambiguous marks on caves, on walls, on stones, and sought to read meaning into them. From ancient petroglyphs to medieval carvings, interpretation has always required imagination. The Westford Knight is no different. Whether it is the memorial of a real knight or the accidental art of nature, it has become a vessel for human storytelling, and perhaps that is why it endures. It binds together the local farmer, the scholar, the dreamer, and the skeptic in a single act of wonder, the act of standing before a stone and asking, what if? Legends of the Knight have also woven themselves into the larger fabric of New England lore. Tales of secret voyages, hidden maps, and Templar treasure have long found fertile ground in the region. The story of Oak Island in Nova Scotia, with its mysterious pit and whispered connections to the Templars, is never far removed from discussions of the Westford Knight. Both suggest that clues to a hidden history may lie scattered across the forests and coasts of North America, waiting for the patient eye to uncover them. And though historians may caution against leaping to conclusions, the allure of such connections is undeniable. Standing before the carving today, one is struck not by grandeur, but by subtlety. The figure is faint, almost elusive, demanding patience and imagination to see. Moss clings to its edges, and the stone bears the marks of centuries of exposure. It is not a monument of towering scale, but a quiet, almost humble reminder of the passage of time. And yet, perhaps that is what makes it powerful. In its quietness, it invites contemplation. It asks us to step closer, to lean down, to truly look. And in that act, we are drawn into its mystery, becoming part of the centuries-long chain of people who have wondered at the night. If Sir James Gunn truly lies there, then the stone is more than a curiosity. It is a grave, a site of mourning, a relic of a journey cut short. It would mean that, beneath the soil of Massachusetts, rests the bones of a man who crossed an ocean in pursuit of destiny, only to fall in a land unknown to his homeland. To think of this possibility is to feel the weight of history in a personal, human way, not as abstract timelines or distant events, but as the story of a single man whose footsteps may have echoed in those forests long before the Pilgrims. The Westford Knight, then, stands at a crossroads of history and legend. It may never be fully explained, never proven beyond doubt, but its power lies precisely in that uncertainty. For as long as it remains ambiguous, it will continue to inspire wonder. It will continue to fuel debates, to spark imaginations, and to whisper of forgotten journeys. And perhaps, in the end, that is its true purpose, not to provide answers, but to remind us that history is never fully written, that the stones beneath our feet still hold secrets, and that the past is far richer, far stranger, than we often allow ourselves to believe. The silence of Oak Island is deceptive. Standing upon its shores today, one might be tempted to see it as nothing more than a quiet patch of Nova Scotia coastline, a tree-lined island surrounded by salt water, seabirds wheeling above the tide, pressing endlessly against its edges. Yet, beneath its soil, countless stories lie buried. For more than 2 centuries, this modest scrap of land has captivated treasure hunters, historians, dreamers, and skeptics alike. Too many. Oak Island is the most tangible link to the theories of Templar voyages, sacred geometry, and the secret migration of esoteric knowledge into the New World. To others, it is a cautionary tale of obsession, a reminder of how hope can entangle generation after generation, sinking them into pits as deep as the fabled money pit itself. The legend begins in 1795, when a teenager named Daniel McGinnis supposedly stumbled upon a depression in the ground beneath. A tree with a sawed-off branch, according to the account. A tackle block hung from the limb, suggesting some great effort had been undertaken there long before. McGinnis and his friends, driven by curiosity, began to dig. What they found seemed to confirm their sense of hidden purpose. At regular intervals, layers of logs, packed clay, and even stones inscribed with mysterious markings appeared. The deeper they went, the more convinced they became that something extraordinary lay buried beneath them, and thus was born the legend of the Oak Island money pit, a legend that has since devoured fortunes, consumed lives, and ignited imaginations across the world. What makes Oak Island so tantalizing is not merely the promise of treasure, but the possibility of connection. Theories about its origins span a staggering range of possibilities. Some believe it is the hiding place of pirate loot, buried by Captain Kidd or Blackbird. Others suggest it holds the lost works of Francis Bacon or even the original manuscripts of Shakespeare. But perhaps the most enduring and alluring theory of all is that the island conceals the hidden wealth or secret knowledge of the Knights Templar, smuggled out of Europe during their persecution in the early 14th century. To many, Oak Island is less about gold and jewels than it is about the survival of wisdom, the transmission of esoteric truths that the Templars carried into exile. Supporters of the Templar theory point to the Sinclair family once more. Henry Sinclair, the Scottish nobleman whose supposed voyage westward we have already encountered in connection to the Westford Knight, is said by some to have made landfall in Nova Scotia. If so, Oak Island may have served as a secure outpost for their mission, a repository for relics too precious to be lost. Some even whisper of the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant buried beneath its soil, relics spirited out of France during the Templar suppression. While such claims stretch the imagination, they also fit neatly into the broader pattern of sacred geometry and encoded symbolism that seems to surround the Templars wherever they are found. The geometry of the island itself is often cited as a clue. Researchers have noted alignments between key features on Oak Island and other sites in Nova Scotia and New England. When mapped, these alignments often echo geometric forms tied to esoteric traditions, triangles, pentagons, and star-shaped arrangements. The so-called Nolan's Cross, a formation of massive boulders on the island, has been interpreted as deliberate, its stones arranged in a perfect cruciform shape. To those who believe, this is no coincidence. It is a marker, a signpost, left by initiates who knew that geometry was a language, a way of encoding messages that could endure through time, visible only to those with eyes to see. But Oak Island is also a place of profound tragedy. The pursuit of its secrets has cost lives. Over the centuries, at least 6 men have perished in accidents while digging, drowned in floods triggered by booby-trap tunnels, or crushed by collapses. Some whisper of a curse, a prophecy that 7 must die before the treasure is revealed. Whether curse or coincidence, the pattern only deepens the aura of danger that clings to the island. For every breakthrough, there seems to be a setback, flooding tunnels, machinery ruined by mud, shafts collapsing into themselves. The island resists intrusion, as though whatever lies beneath is determined to remain hidden. Skeptics point out that natural geology may explain much of the mystery. Sinkholes, underground aquifers, and layers of glacial till could easily account for the so-called traps that treasure hunters have encountered. What appears to be evidence of deliberate engineering may, in fact, be the handiwork of nature. The inscribed stone supposedly found at 90 feet, a key piece of evidence, suggesting human design was lost, its translation passed down only in secondary accounts. Some believe the stone never existed at all. To these voices, Oak Island is not a Templar vault but a monument to human imagination, built on flimsy evidence and wishful thinking. And yet, the allure persists. Even modern technology, with its drills, cameras, and sonar, has failed to fully pierce the mystery. Each generation uncovers something new: wooden timbers deep below ground, traces of metal, fragments of parchment, but never enough to provide certainty. The effect is intoxicating, just enough to sustain belief, never enough to end it. The island itself seems to conspire in this delicate balance, offering glimpses of possibility while keeping the heart of the mystery out of reach. What drives men to return again and again to Oak Island? Perhaps it is not greed, but something deeper: the human need to believe that the world still contains secrets worth chasing. The idea that beneath our feet might lie not just treasure, but proof that history is richer, stranger, and more interconnected than we dare imagine. To those who dream of the Templars, Oak Island is not just a dig site, it is a symbolic gateway. If the Templars truly reached these shores, if they truly buried their relics here, then the story of the New World begins centuries earlier than we have been taught. And that changes everything. The story of Oak Island is not just about treasure. It is about faith in mystery, in legend, in the possibility that something greater than ourselves lies hidden just beyond reach. That faith can be destructive, consuming wealth and lives in endless pursuit, but it can also be inspiring, reminding us that wonder still exists in the world, that not everything has been mapped, cataloged, or explained away. Oak Island, in its stubborn refusal to surrender its secrets, stands as a living testament to the enduring power of mystery. Perhaps, in the end, the greatest treasure of Oak Island is not what may or may not lie buried beneath its soil. It is the story itself, the way it has drawn together farmers, explorers, engineers, historians, and storytellers across centuries. The way it has linked the legends of the old world with the dreams of the new. The way it continues to whisper of possibilities that stretch beyond the boundaries of accepted history. In its soil may lie relics of the past, or nothing at all, but in our minds, it holds something far more enduring, the hope that the past still has surprises waiting for us, the belief that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to keep us searching. And so Oak Island endures, poised between fact and legend, skepticism and belief, a quiet patch of Nova Scotia that holds within it not just the possibility of treasure, but the weight of centuries of human longing. Whether it conceals the hoard of pirates, the manuscripts of philosophers, or the relics of knights who once guarded the greatest secrets of Christendom, the island remains what it has always been, a mirror for our imagination, and a reminder that history is never as finished, as simple, or as certain as we like to believe. The world of academic history prides itself on rigor, discipline, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Yet when it comes to topics like the Templars in America, Oak Island, or Rosslyn Chapel, something curious happens. The shutters close, the doors tighten, and what might otherwise be debated with healthy skepticism instead becomes territory marked off with a warning sign, "Do not enter." This is where our journey turns from ruins and relics to the human dimension of history itself. The scholars, researchers, and visionaries who risk their reputations by daring to ask questions the establishment would rather leave unspoken. For centuries, academia has carefully guarded the boundaries of what is acceptable to discuss, and Oak Island, Templar voyages, and sacred geometry almost always fall outside the pale, and yet, it is in these very contested spaces where some of the most interesting and potentially transformative conversations reside. Academic resistance to alternative theories is not a modern phenomenon. Even in the 19th century, when discoveries like the Kensington Runestone or the Newport Tower first entered public debate, scholars rushed to dismiss them as hoaxes, misinterpretations, or at best, curiosities unworthy of serious attention. Why such urgency to discredit? The answer lies in the very foundations of historical study. Universities and scholarly institutions, especially in the West, built themselves upon a model of authoritative narratives. History was meant to be orderly, linear, rational, and above all, explainable. To suggest that the Templars supposedly crushed and scattered in 1307 secretly crossed the Atlantic and embedded themselves in North America centuries before Columbus threatened not just a timeline, but an entire worldview. It challenged the belief that Europe's age of discovery marked the first great leap of humanity. Across the Atlantic, it suggested instead that much of the past is hidden, encoded, perhaps even deliberately concealed. For academics, such claims are dangerous not only because they are difficult to prove, but because they can destabilize the very authority of the profession itself. A historian who grants too much weight to the Kensington Runestone risks being labeled unserious. An archaeologist who speaks publicly about Rosslyn Chapel's maze carvings risks being mocked by colleagues, relegated to the fringe. And an anthropologist who entertains Oak Island's Templar vault theory risks seeing decades of careful work evaporate under the scorn of peer review. This is the reality for those who work within the system. Careers, reputations, and livelihoods depend on not stepping too far outside the sanctioned boundaries. And yet, in the quiet corners of libraries and late-night conference conversations, many scholars admit a simple truth: not all mysteries can be dismissed so easily. The carvings in Roslin are real. The inscriptions on the Kensington runestone are real. The Newport Tower stands where it stands, aligned in strange and evocative ways. The Zeno map exists, with its depiction of lands long before Columbus. These are not fabrications, they are material facts. What is in dispute is their interpretation. Did a farmer in Minnesota concoct the runestone? Did Scottish masons in the 15th century accidentally carve plants that resemble maize and aloe? Did colonial settlers construct the Newport Tower unconsciously? Echoing medieval forms, the artifacts exist. The reluctance lies not in acknowledging them, but in considering explanations that reach beyond the conventional boundaries of history. This reluctance has a cost. It creates an academic silence, a kind of enforced taboo. Those outside the establishment see the silence as arrogance, even conspiracy, proof that scholars are hiding the truth. But from the inside, the silence is often more about fear of ridicule, fear of career suicide, fear of being lumped in with wild theories about aliens or Atlantis. To question accepted timelines about transatlantic contact is to step onto dangerous ground, where nuance is lost and ridicule is swift. Yet silence breeds suspicion. It leaves space for more extreme voices to dominate the conversation, voices less concerned with evidence than with spectacle. Thus, in trying to protect the integrity of their field, academics may inadvertently fan the flames of the very fringe theories they wish to contain. Consider the case of the Kensington runestone. From the moment it was unearthed in 1898, it sparked heated debate. Scholars, unwilling to believe Norse explorers could have left a record so deep in the continent, declared it a forgery. Yet linguistic analysis has, over the years, revealed features difficult to explain as a simple 19th century hoax. Still, most academics avoid the subject altogether. The result? Public fascination grows. Alternative researchers publish books. Documentaries air on television, and the academic voice is barely present. By refusing to engage, scholars have ceded the territory to others, leaving the public to navigate between silence on one side and speculation on the other. The same is true of Roslin Chapel. Scholars acknowledge its beauty, its artistry, its symbolic richness, but when confronted with the carvings of maize and aloe, most retreat into the language of coincidence or dismissiveness. They only look like New World plants, some say, without offering deeper investigation. Once again, silence reigns, and in that silence, others step forward to suggest bold possibilities. That Sinclair voyage to America, that the Templars preserve hidden knowledge, that Roslin encodes maps of the New World in stone. Whether true or not, the refusal of academia to engage seriously with these questions leaves the impression that something is being hidden, even if what is being hidden is only discomfort. For researchers who do dare to cross this boundary, the path is lonely. They find themselves marginalized, sometimes ostracized. Consider Frederick J. Pohl, who in the 20th century argued passionately for pre-Columbian Norse and Templar contact with America. Though his research was meticulous, he was dismissed as speculative. His work left to gather dust in the margins of library shelves. Others, like Scott Wolter, embraced the role of outsider, pursuing theories of the hooked X and the Templar presence in North America. For many academics, Wolter represents exactly what they fear, that by stepping into these waters, they will be forever branded as pseudoscientists. Yet for many in the public, Wolter is a voice daring to ask the questions that academia avoids. The gulf between the two grows wider. This tension reveals something profound about the nature of history itself. History is not just about evidence, it is about power. Who gets to decide what counts as evidence? Who gets to write the story of the past? And whose voices are silenced? To control history is to control identity, culture, even destiny. If the Templars truly did cross the Atlantic, if they truly embedded their knowledge in the New World, then the story of Western history is not one of abrupt discovery in 1492, but one of continuity, of secret migrations and hidden legacies. To admit that possibility requires not just revising textbooks, but rethinking how history is constructed in the first place. For many, that leap is too threatening, and yet, cracks are beginning to show. Archaeology in recent decades has confirmed what was once dismissed, that the Norse reached North America centuries before Columbus. At Land's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, once ridiculed, the sagas of Vinland are now taken seriously. If one impossible contact has been proven true, how many others might still be waiting? The boundary between speculation and fact is thinner than many academics would like to admit. What was once heresy is now taught in classrooms. What is dismissed today may one day be accepted truth. For the dreamers, this is fuel for hope. If one thread has been validated, why not another? Perhaps Rosslyn does encode maize. Perhaps the Newport Tower was more than a colonial mill. Perhaps Oak Island does conceal relics hidden by fleeing Templars. Each of these claims may or may not hold. But the point is clear. History is not static. It is a living conversation, shifting with each discovery, each reevaluation. To shut the door on possibilities is to deny history its vitality. But this chapter is not only about academic silence, it is about courage, courage to ask questions, even at personal cost, courage to follow evidence, even when it leads into disreputable territory, courage to admit that we may not know as much as we think we do. The Templar theories, whether true or not, invite us to practice that courage. They challenge us to look again at what we thought was settled, to see the cracks where light seeps through, and in doing so, they remind us that history is not a closed book. It is a mystery still unfolding, waiting for those willing to risk the ridicule to turn the page. In the end, perhaps the greatest secret the Templars left us was not a treasure chest buried on Oak Island, or an inscription hidden in Rosslyn Chapel. Perhaps it is the example of mystery itself, the reminder that some truths survive not in plain sight, but in whispers, symbols, and half-buried traces. To honor that legacy is not to accept every theory without question, but to cultivate the willingness to wonder, to imagine, and to seek. For in that seeking, we find not just the past, but the possibility of reshaping our understanding of the present. And so, as we stand at the threshold of these mysteries, we find ourselves not only confronting what might have happened centuries ago, but what is happening right now. In the halls of academia, in the minds of researchers, in the hearts of dreamers. The resistance to the Templar theories tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the past. It reveals our fears, our hopes, our longing for certainty, and our hunger for mystery. It is here, at the intersection of silence and possibility, that the true treasure may be found, the courage to keep asking questions, no matter how unsettling the answers may be. The journey through the mystery of the Westford Knight has carried us across centuries of speculation, across continents of possibility, and through layers of stone, myth, and memory. Now, as we approach the end of this story, we find ourselves confronted not with a single answer, but with a choice. What kind of story do we believe history is? Is it a tale of certainty, where every line is drawn cleanly, every fact pinned securely to a date and name? Or is it a shifting mosaic, where stones like the Westford Knight gleam like fragments of a greater picture, one that challenges us to see beyond what is written, to imagine what might have been, and to wrestle with the silence of the past? The carved figure in Westford, Massachusetts, has never offered its truth easily to some eyes. It is erosion, nothing more than the random shapes that time and weather etch into stone. To others, it is a memorial, a sword, a shield, a cross, a knightly figure frozen in time, marking a place where a man once fell far from home. This ambiguity is what has given the knight its enduring power. For more than 6 centuries, people have looked at that bedrock and seen not only a mark, but a question and questions, especially those carved into the very bones of the earth, have a way of outlasting answers. If the carving truly is a memorial, then the figure it commemorates is most often linked to Sir James Gunn, a companion of Henry Sinclair of Orkney, who some believe voyaged to North America long before Columbus. According to this theory, Gunn perished on American soil, and his fellow knights left behind a marker in the ancient style of stone effigies found across Scotland. The detail of the carving, though faint today, has been described by witnesses across generations. The hilt of a sword, the suggestion of a cross, the outline of armor, each of these details has been debated, redrawn, even recarved to preserve them, making it difficult to know where the original ends and interpretation begins. Yet the persistence of these observations speaks to a collective memory, a shared sense that the stone is not like others. Skeptics point out that nature can be an artist in her own right. Frost, cracks, and the slow weathering of granite can mimic human design, creating shapes that look meaningful but are nothing more than chance. Archaeologists warn against seeing patterns where none exist, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. They argue that the Westford Knight is a case study in this human tendency. Our yearning to see faces in clouds, figures in shadows, knights in stone, and yet, one must ask, why has this particular stone captured such enduring attention, while countless others eroded by time have not? Why has it been the subject of books, pilgrimages, and debates spanning centuries? Perhaps the answer lies less in the stone itself, and more in what we, as humans, need it to be. Legends often arise where evidence is thin, filling in the gaps with meaning. The story of the Westford Knight blossomed not in an age of scientific certainty, but in a time when America itself was searching for a deeper past, a lineage older than the Revolution, older even than Columbus. To imagine that knights had crossed the Atlantic and left their mark was to imagine a bridge between the old world and the new, a sense that America's soil was part of a grander, more mysterious saga than the textbooks allowed. This is why the knight has endured. It is not only a stone, it is a mirror, reflecting our longing for connection to lost ages and hidden journeys. As we close this story, we must acknowledge the other great actors in this play, the Knights Templar themselves. For centuries, their legacy has been wrapped in mystery, myth, and secrecy. Officially disbanded in the early 1300s, the Templars became the subject of endless speculation about treasures spirited away, voyages undertaken in secret, knowledge preserved in hidden symbols. The Westford Knight fits seamlessly into this tapestry. If knights of old did indeed cross the Atlantic, whether Sinclair's men or others, they would have carried not only swords and armor, but stories encoded in stone, waiting to be rediscovered. Even if the carving is not Templar, the idea that it could be tells us something about the enduring aura of the Templars themselves. Few other medieval orders inspire the same mix of awe and curiosity. The Templars were warriors, bankers, builders, and mystics, depending on who tells the tale. Their suppression by church and crown only deepened the sense of mystery, as if they carried secrets too dangerous to survive in the open. To connect them with America is to extend their legend into the New World, to imagine them as part of the hidden prelude to our history. And yet, one must be careful. Legends are seductive, but they can also blur the lines between truth and imagination. What if the Westford Knight is nothing more than erosion? What if the story of Sir James Gunn is apocryphal, a romantic invention, layered onto the stone centuries later? Would that diminish its value? Or would it reveal something equally important, that humans, faced with the silence of the past, will always carve stories of their own? Perhaps the Westford Knight is both, a natural formation and a cultural monument, shaped as much by weather as by imagination. There is a haunting beauty in that possibility. The knight becomes not just a symbol of what might have been, but of what we yearn to believe. It embodies the tension between fact and myth, between archaeology and legend, between stone and story. It asks us not simply, what is true, but also, why do we need this to be true in that sense? The knight is not only carved in stone, it is carved in us. As night settles over the hills of Massachusetts, the stone lies where it has always lain, silent and weathered, half hidden in the earth. Travelers still come to see it, to trace the faint lines with their fingers, to stand where generations before them stood and wonder. The carving does not answer, it does not speak, but it invites us to listen, to imagine the footfalls of armored men in the forests of the New World, to hear the clang of a sword laid upon stone, to feel the presence of something vast and mysterious, stretching across time and ocean. And so, as our story closes, we are left not with certainty, but with mystery, and perhaps that is as it should be. History, after all, is not only what happened, it is also what is remembered, what is imagined, what is whispered across generations. The Westford Knight may never reveal its secret, but in its silence, it teaches us something profound, that the past is not dead stone, but living memory, shaped by our need to seek, to wonder, to connect. In the end, the question is not whether the Westford Knight is real, but whether we are willing to keep asking, for it is in the asking, in the endless turning of stone and story, that history becomes alive, and so the night endures, a figure, half seen, half believed, standing guard not only over a patch of Massachusetts bedrock, but over the boundless frontier of human imagination. The story of the Westford Knight does not end here. It lives on in every retelling, in every debate, in every new traveler who bends low to look upon the stone. It lives on in the dream of voyages unrecorded, of connections across oceans, and centuries. It lives on in us, as long as we keep the mystery alive. And so tonight, as we step away from this tale, we leave the night as we found it, lying silent in the earth, holding its secret, a riddle carved in stone, waiting for those who dare to wonder.